So we can start if he's the only one missing.
Okay. Mayor Jacobs? Mayor Jacobs?
Did we lose him?
He just texted me he was having a problem.
Oh, he
It does
is.
look frozen.
Okay, well, we know he's here somewhere.
Yeah. Committeeman Hickey?
Here.
Mr. Strakoff?
Here.
Mr. Rodelius?
Here.
Mr. Leonard?
Here.
Mr. DiGiovanni?
Here.
Mr. Zupnik?
Here.
Ms. Orabana?
Here.
Mr. Walter?
Hey, guys, here.
Chairwoman Gutschall?
Here.
Open public meeting statement. Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board was filed with the Township Clerk and sent to the Bernardsville News and the Courier News and to all subscribers, and posted at the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 16th, 2020.
Okay, should we try the flag salute here? Our flag is missing because the mayor has our flag.
I can see a piece of it behind his shoulder there.
Yeah, I don't have him here. I don't know what happened to him. Oh, there he is. That's where he was supposed to be. Oh, George has got a flag. Okay. All right. Let's start. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of
of
America.
and to the republic for which it stands,
And
one nation,
Under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
Visible.
Liberty.
with liberty and justice for all.
for all.
We haven't gotten any better.
We haven't gotten any worse either.
Some more.
That's right. Glad to
We're
start.
Every little break, we're going to get better.
All right, we have some minutes to approve. We have the minutes from June 4th, if you've had a look at them. I need a motion to approve.
This is Scott Zupnik, motion to approve.
Second, George.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed or abstain? I think everybody was here. So we also have, the minutes are approved for the 4th. We also have minutes for the 11th.
So moved.
Second, Jeff.
Everyone approve?
Aye.
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 One abstain. Minutes are approved for the 11th. Okay, I'll open it up to the public if they have any comments or questions other than what's on the agenda for tonight. You could raise your hand. I don't see anybody. So we will move on. Our hearing tonight, we can start with Bedminster Farms.
Madam Chairman, before we get started, we might
Yes.
want to just carry the relocate application
Yes,
to a date
absolutely.
certain. Because
Okay,
we, if anybody was interested, we want to tell them right away that we're not doing that tonight and we're carrying it.
yes, good idea. Mhm.
We need to sort of get a date from you and Paul and
Paul, okay,
The meetings in August would be the 6th and the 13th. I don't know who might be available when, but if I throw something out there first, I would prefer the 6th.
6 is okay with me.
I'm good with that.
Everybody good with the 6th?
Yep.
Okay, all right, then we'll go to the 6th, August 6th for that, Tom.
Okay, so I'll just, Paul, are you satisfied that they could get you the plans with enough time to read them and look at, comment on them? And
Yes, I spoke to the engineer yesterday and he said he would be able to have the architect get everything in on time.
okay, great. So,
Good.
Madam Chairman, I'll just confirm for the record that the application of relocate for preliminary and final site plan and any necessary variances is carried without additional notices to August 6, 2020 at 7 p.m. Do anybody here on that? We are not hearing it tonight, and it's officially being carried to August 6th at 7 p.m. No further notice.
And I assume the applicants agreed to the delay or the
Yeah,
postponement.
the delay they did, and they need to be told about the 6th, but they knew that you had to set a date. So.
Mhm. Good. Okay. Thank you, Tom. All right. I guess we can to start our hearing with the Bedminster Farms then. We're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the board, Mike Lavery from the firm of Lavery, Salvaggi, Ebermeis & Cohen, representing 1120 and 1310 Leamington Road, LLC, also known as Bedminster Farms. We were deemed complete for 8 lots at the last meeting, and then there were a number of questions that the board had, and then we responded with some information, and we got Mr. Ferrero's response today. I have with me Ron Kennedy, our engineer on the project, as well as Jim Downs, one of the principals. So what I'd like to do is start with Mr. Kennedy to answer some of the concerns that were raised by the board at the last hearing, as well as to answer some of the concerns raised by Mr. Ferrero's letter.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Kennedy was sworn in at the last meeting.
Right.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Mr. Kennedy, you understand you're still under oath?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Kennedy, where are you?
All right, so what would be helpful is to have the screen to be able to show some of the exhibits.
Ron, do you have multiple microphones on where you are? Because you're echoing pretty bad.
Yeah, I'll mute mine.
I'm in the same room with Mike, so he's going to mute his. How's that sound?
That's better.
Okay, if Janine or someone can give me permission, then I can pull up my screen.
I have multiple participants can share. You should be able to share your documents.
Okay, let me try. How was that?
I can see it.
I lost you.
Sure, son. Mute all the way down. I still got a sound. Turn the sound on. Okay, so what I want to focus on is a couple of the changes since our last meeting and the submission that we sent back to the town was the environmental constraints, which is this exhibit, which is the second exhibit I showed at the last hearing, has been updated based on the various changes that we talked about at the last meeting. So they were along wetlands areas. Some, not all, of the transition areas went from 50 feet to 150 feet, primarily along the Middle Brook and some sections of the Hoopstick Brook. Additionally, there were some areas for the flood hazard permits that were expanded upon. So based on that, what we did was go back and relook at your environmental constraints or your resource conservation calculations. And on the cover sheet of the submission that we submitted back to you of our documents, we have the actual resource calculations. And I think the important thing to that, and I want to spend some time going over that, that is what we'll call the build out or the conformance to zoning of this project. And I think that was a key element that was discussed at the last meeting. So I want to break it down into the 3 separate lots. And the question was raised last time, if you look at all 3 of the existing lots, 15, which I'll point you down on my center of the screen right now, which is on Lamington Road, generally on the the west side of the project. Lot 21, which is on Lamington Road on the west side of the project, and lot 12, which is in the rear of the property that doesn't have frontage on Lamington Road. The combination of those 3 lots have been looked at of 113 acres, and the calculations from the environmental constraint standpoint, it's 7.17 acres, not acres, sorry, 7.17 lots that are available for a development. So Taking that further, per your ordinance, we then went and looked at each lot separately. So lot 12, which is in the rear, that lot itself, you can have 4 lots that have enough acreage that would require or allow for 4 lots. Lot 15, which was previously approved by this board and is part of this application now, has 1.58 acres, or excuse me, I keep saying acres, 1.58 lots that would be allowed under those resource conservation calculations. Whereas now there's a 2-lot subdivision that's approved there. And then on lot 21, which my pointer is on the Vreeland lot, that would be 1.57 lots would be allowed for that. So based on those calculations, if we go on the build out, and I'm going to go to the next exhibit. Takes a second to regenerate. Which is essentially the plan we presented last time. There's been no change to that. Is that plan itself, I'll go through each one of those areas. So in the rear of the property, which is lot 12, there is a total of 68 acres. It yields 4.1 lots. Our plan had a total of 5 lots. Again, we have the combined 2 lots, 12.06 and 12.07 because of the Board of Health approval. But if we look at conforming, it would be the same road configuration as we have now. There'd be no change to that. And essentially, lot 12, which is where my pointer is now, on the left side of the sheet, and the neighboring 12.06, they would be combined to 1 lot. Lot 12.07 would be about the same size. There'd be a little adjustment of that lot. 1206, a little adjustment, and then 1208, and then 1209 with a slight adjustment. But generally the same configuration with combining 12 and 12.06. Again, that would show in that rear, it would show 4 conforming lots. They would meet the minimum lot size. They'd have the lot circle, and they would meet the maximum permitted number of principal dwelling units of those 4, and each lot by its own, each lot by its own, with that adjustment, would meet the minimum of the 10 acres that's required per that calculation. So we went through that, and in the rear on what is lot 12, there would be a total of 4 lots allowed by the current configuration of this road network with the cul-de-sac where it's shown right now. We're proposing a total of 5 once Board of Health approval is received. And by the way, just as a sideline, we did go out and test, as we said last time. We made the application to the Board of Health for that additional lot, and I believe their meeting is next Thursday night for the Board of Health meeting that we plan on attending. On lot 15, that was previously approved for a 2-lot subdivision. It had a flag lot that was out to Lamington Road, and that flag lot was 50 foot in width, and that created the frontage for lot 15.01. In creating that flag lot, the lot circle would be under 500 foot for the remaining lot 15, and we saw it and received a variance for that. There'd be no change to that lot configuration at all that's being proposed in this subdivision. The only change, which we think is significant, is the driveway that was going to cross the stream corridor, we removed and have the driveway now going out to the common driveway on lot 12. So that's a change that we're proposing there, but everything else is the same as originally approved as far as the lot configuration. If we go over to lot 21, and it's odd, skinny in the front, it gets a little larger in the rear. Someone's finished so long, get a turn this off. And then it gets skinny in the back again. When we do that, I still can get a lot circle where I'm pointing at 1.04. There's a lot circle that's still allowed there, or I can fit a lot circle of 500 foot in there. The only thing for the existing lot that wouldn't comply is because we're putting a new driveway in that we're calling a private road that would come all the way to the back to the cul-de-sac. The existing house would then be considered a front yard to that right of way. and that would not comply with the 200-foot requirement. It's about 100 foot, and that would need a variance for a front yard setback. All the lot configuration of that existing lot would comply. Other than that, we can get the lot circle. We can do certainly it's 23 acres, so it has plenty of land. We can meet all the environmental constraints associated with the resource conservation calculations. So in looking at that, when I add those
Excuse me,
numbers
Ron,
up,
before you go on, I hate to
lots
interrupt.
that are permitted by zoning in the back without any variances. It is the one lot on existing lot 21 that is existing today with the house on it. And because of the driveway or the private road and the right of way, the existing house would need a setback variance for the front yard, but it would conform in any other situation. In the purest way, if they say it doesn't conform, I can knock the house down and build another house, and there's a building envelope for that, and I can get that lot to conform. Not what we want to do, but I could. And then on lot 15, again, 2-lot subdivision, we asked for, sought relief and got relief in the last application for this lot. So if I add these lots up, conformance-wise, it's 4 lots in the back, 1 lot on 21, and 2 lots on 15. So it's 7 lots that would be allowed based on what you've approved already and your current ordinance, albeit the setback for that existing house. And again, solution, if that's an issue, is knock the house down. So that's conformance. So I think that's important that we establish the conformity that the board asked for last time of what that can be for this configuration. And it really is borne by those resource conservation calculations that I broke down on the plan. And it shows each of the existing lots, 12, 15, and 21, and it also shows the combined lots. So it shows that 4 lots can be configured in the rear. I can show a plan for that based on this configuration. 1 lot on the lot 15 and 1 lot on lot 21. So that's the first part. I just wanted to make sure that we touched base on so we have an understanding of our existing lot yield.
Hey, Ron, can I ask you a question about that, please?
Yeah, me too.
If you look at that lot that you're creating with that you said has the variance for the front yard setback, I'm not sure I see how the 500-foot circle fits in there, because I'm comparing that to lot 15, and it doesn't look like it had, well, that's the new lot you're creating over on that side. But on the other side of the right of way.
Paul, I'm saying is it's this lot 21, it's just 1 lot. I'm not
No,
saying
it can't be 1 lot because it has a right of way through the middle of it. So it's divided into 2 parcels.
Well, again, the easy, then I could say that's we remove the house, or we make that part of the back lot, and that lot could be standalone by itself.
Okay, I understand.
You know, I can move things around to make that conforming if that's the concern on that lot 21. But I definitely can get, you know, the lot circle can fit in there. You're saying I can't have a lot with both sides of the road.
That's correct. It's if you have a road, it's separate lots on either side of the road.
Okay. But again, I can make that conform. The lot line goes out here. I can put the lot line tighter to the road here. And so I can make that conform and say this house goes, or it is appended to, well, it'd be the same thing, that rear in the
Yeah,
lot.
then you've got it's
Then I got
another
an
lot
orphan
that
area.
doesn't comply.
It'd be an open space lot. We can have that. But again, it's the configuration of that existing road. So I could get something that I could go, I can give it to a neighbor. If that's the saying that I got a conforming plan, I still at 23 acres, I can confine conformance in lot 21 and have this new roadway go through here.
Could you move the road over, Ron?
Sure.
Maybe move the road over so it becomes part of that lot.
Yeah, and it's a theoretical discussion, but sure, I can move the road to the other side. I mean, again,
Then you
that's
wouldn't have
not
that subdivision problem.
yeah, that's not necessarily where, if you visited the site, that's not necessarily where you would want it. If I zoom in, takes a minute to regenerate.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, the driveway exists to this location where my pointer is now. So
Yeah.
if we moved it over to this side, we physically could do that. We'd still have a problem with the setback here, but there's structures that are right here that are barns that they intend to reuse. The proposed septic systems here, I can move that over. But again, I don't think it's the right location for the lot line here. When we zoom up, there's a wetland area here that I'd have to get to go through,
Yeah.
but I could. I mean, I can get
Yeah.
a permit for that. It's not ideal from a practical standpoint, but
I
again,
see
it goes
that.
back to the theoretical standpoint that we can get a lot on existing 21, just a single lot. I'm not talking about a second lot. I'm trying to prove that base case first, that we
Mhm.
can get a lot on existing lot 21 and still put the driveway here. I can create that. And again, I can go and put the theoretical road over here. Not ideal, but I
Yeah.
physically could do that. And we would have a lot circle. You see this blue line here is the 500-foot lot circle.
Yeah.
I would have enough resource conservation areas on that remaining area. And with the concern that Paul raised, I could remediate from that standpoint by putting it theoretically over there. Not where you would want it if you went out to the field and see where the existing patterns are, and this is the area that the farmer drives back to the back of the property. It doesn't belong over there, but it could be from a theoretical standpoint.
Right. Well, we can weigh the
So
options, you know.
the notion here that I was at least trying to go through is the fact is this is what exists today. This is your calculations, and what if it was a straight up subdivision and we weren't asking for any relief or the agricultural elements that we're doing and the restrictions I'm going to talk about, then it would be just a straight up subdivision with no restrictions on it. And again, 4 lots in the back, 1 lot on lot 21, and then we have the 2 existing lots that are on 15. That's in my view, the base case. The proposal
But
is
Ron-
Carol, before we leave that, it's, Paul, what are your thoughts on Ron's calculation with compliant subdivision as 7 units?
Well, I think the gross tract yield on resource constraints shows 7 lots. Okay. The individual lots themselves are different, and that's, I think, where Ron is joining these together, and where the ultimate yield is something below 7. And again, as Ron said, the lot 15 has previously been approved with variances, but those lots they're not necessarily fully compliant at this point. If we were looking at this as a complete blank slate with all these parcels, then you would have a different story on lot 15. It would probably be 1 single lot and not 2 that would comply there.
Could I just add for a second?
Who's
Variance
speaking?
that was granted previous.
Oh, Frank?
This is Frank Parrish.
Okay.
I call him the other way, but anyway, when we looked at the relief being requested, the fact that lot 15 became 2 lots with variance that runs with the property does not imply that it is 2 lots in this new configuration and consolidation of all these lots. So I think Paul said the most important thing, which is it looks like he can qualify for 7 lots, which is what he's asking for. But if any part of that is relying on the benefit of prior relief that applies to a different property than this collection of lots, I would ask Tom whether that's something we need to look more closely at.
You do have to look closely at it. It is a series of subdivision exceptions for any lot that doesn't meet the resource constraints ordinances. And so that's why what might help, Ron, is if it was good that you focused on this, but could you look at Paul's most recent report and item Roman numeral 3B, and try to help us understand what you said in testimony just before, and how that jives with the resource constraints adjustments in this chart.
I can. So Tom, if I take that, I was focusing on compliance with not what we were asking for, but compliance to the zoning ordinance. So again, what we said is 4 lots would conform in the rear. We have the existing 2 lots that may or may not conform. We have a variance on it, but it's 1 lot if we're going from scratch. And on lot 21, it's 1 lot if we're going from scratch. The proposal and that chart that has on Paul's 2B on page 8 of Paul's report, we are proposing 5 lots that are in this rear section on lot 12. The nuance is we combine the 2 because of the Board of Health approval, but the layout is based on 5 lots in the rear. We have the same layout on lot 15 with no change to the lot configuration. The only change is we're putting the driveway out to the private road and not having to go through the environmentally constrained area. And then on lots 21, we're proposing 2 separate lots on the 23 acres. Each would be in excess of 10 acres, but we're proposing the 2 separate lots. So our proposal is 9 total lots on this, when the conformance is the 7 with the variance on lot 15. So Paul's chart, and I can go through each one of these lots so we just make sure that everyone's on the same page. I'll show you what complies and what doesn't comply to the resource conservation. So on the lot, I'll go down his list. So remaining lot 12 does not comply to the resource conservation. The combined of lot 1206 and 1207 does, because it's combining it to a 26-acre lot because we don't have Board of Health approval. Lot 12.08 and 12.09 comply, so they comply to the resource conservation calculations. So the 2 comply, the 1 in the middle, because we're combining it, complies. If we separate it, they do not comply. So it would be 12, 1206, and 1207 would not comply if we were coming back to you with Board of Health approval. On lot 15, as we previously testified on the other application, is both of those lots don't comply. It's a total of 1.57 lots per the calculation. So we're short of compliance on either of those lots from a resource conservation calculation. On lot 21 is the remaining lot 21 will comply with the resource conservation. It doesn't comply with the 300 or the 500-foot lot circle. And 21.04 is shy by a couple of tenths for the resource conservation on 21.04. So again, 21 complies. 21.04 was just shy of compliance for the resource conservation. So that's how all 9 lots are being proposed, with 1, 2, 3 today, actually 4, the 2 existing 15-acre lots, and the 21.04 would not comply, and then lot 12 would not comply. So 4 of those lots would not comply with the resource conservation calculations.
Could I please interrupt with a
Now, because of that,
question?
and the ask of that non-compliance, what the offer that we want to spend time talking about that was written in the document that you were submitted by Jim on the agricultural purposes is we are proposing to restrict the development on each of these lots with a farmhouse exception area of 1.5 acres around each house site. So because we're asking for this relief and we comply to the size of the lots, we comply to their setbacks. 1 lot doesn't comply with the lot circle, but all the other components we're complying with. But we're also, because we're asking for that relief on at least 3 or 4 of the lots of these resource conservation restrictions, we are offering a farmhouse exception area that would require a maximum disturbance around the farmhouse of 1.5 acres. And again, to meet the objectives that Jim Downs has talked about with this property of agriculture and farming practices, this would be something that would be in the form of a deed restriction that this board would approve. And it essentially takes the remaining portion of each lot, and it either has to be in environmental constrained areas that aren't agricultural purpose right now, it would stay as it is, as an open space, and the fields themselves that would be outside the 1.5 acres, each one of those areas would essentially be restricted as an agricultural restriction. So we feel that's a great benefit to those folks in the community of the neighborhood itself that restricts and doesn't have the spread out of a typical house that would be on a lot like this. When we add up the 1.5 acres and 9 total lots that are being proposed here, that's 13.5 acres. Plus, it's about 1.5 acres of the common driveway and the environ right around the common driveway. So that totals 15 acres of 113 acres would be allowed to do something in. The rest of it, almost 100 acres, 98 acres, would be restricted in some type of format that it can't have what's normal for a residential house site. A pool, a tennis court, the out structures for non-agricultural purposes wouldn't be allowed in any of the 98 acres on the remaining portion of the property. So that's what we didn't express well enough at the last meeting, but that's the cornerstone of the relief that we're asking for. We conform to, again, the lot size. We're not conforming to the resource conservation. We have a plan for the agricultural elements that would be managed on this property. And we're willing to restrict that each individual lot owner can only have an environ around their house, including their driveway, that would be limited to 1.5 acres. Furthering that, and I'm going to just show you another exhibit quickly, is we prepared another exhibit. Actually, I didn't. We had one of Jim's landscape architects prepare this. And this is on one of the lots, what a typical 1.5 acre would be for that house site. So this is on Lamington Road. This is the lot that's approved already. That's remaining lot 15. And what's in the lighter green or more yellowish green would be the 1.5 acre. And the rest of it would be, livestock and pasture and hay in the front. It would be orchard that would be there, wildflower meadow in the back, the pond that's in the rear that exists today. And then Jim, what do you have in here? A hobby farm area that would be there. So again, the intent is to have a mix of agricultural uses there. It's not just one hayfield that Jim has, and he tries to outline some of those features in the report that was submitted to you. But this would be a typical lot development that would occur on a property. And again, it would limit the disturbance for the non-agricultural uses to only that 1.5 acres, including that driveway. And the rest of it would be part of the farming activity. So that's the ask is some relief for a number of these lots on the resource conservation calculations. The give or the offer that we're trying to work through is have it restricted, highly restricted, that would limit the disturbance to residential to a small component. And the rest of it being managed as the farm activities. And the question is, what if they don't manage or it doesn't work out with the association? It's still restricted that you cannot have residential uses on the rest of this. No different than any other easement that you would have in the form of a conservation easement that either you have or other not-for-profit organizations or the state SADC restriction we'd have. We're talking about those types of restrictions that would be here. Restrictions that you would review and you would approve of what you can and can't do in both sections, in the agricultural area and then in the non-agricultural area.
Madam Chair, could I ask a question?
So
Yeah,
that's
sure. Go right ahead. That's Frank.
The cornerstone of what we're asking for here is to view this as something unique, something exceptional, something that Jim's trying to create a community, but to respect the zoning and to respect what the efforts are with zoning of promoting some of the master plan components, the zoning components of limiting disturbances into environmentally constrained areas. So if you have a lot, even if it's 10 acres, and you have 4 or 5 acres of constrained area, with this 1.5 acre limitation of disturbance for residential use on there, you're still not expanding into those environmental constrained areas that that your ordinance is written to try to avoid. That's the purpose of your constraints ordinance. And I think we're asking for relief on that, but our offer of restricting the farmhouse exception will more than overcome any of the relief that we're asking for on these lots. And even the lots that conform, that 100% conform, that they're more than 10 acres, some are as high as 15 acres, and totally conform to the resource conservation calculations, we will put that same restriction, the 1.5 acre restriction, on all of the 9 lots that are being proposed here.
Frank, you want to?
So that's an overview of what we're really trying to accomplish. This is a blow up of this. And let me go back to the first exhibit. Actually, I want to do another exhibit. This was in your packet as well. And Jim put this together, but this is the farming exhibit that he would be talking about with all those house sites. And you could see on these house sites, they're the same that's on our plans right now.
Madam Chair, could I call?
Existing road.
Yeah, right. Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, just quickly, Ron. When we look at the nature of the relief that's being asked for.
Okay, so
What?
Hello,
Frank?
Can you hear me now?
Hello, Frank?
Yeah, Frank, we need your question.
It says I was muted by the host.
You had a question?
Nope. So again, I'm sorry, I got cut off.
Ron, we're trying to have Frank ask you a question, but we are having difficulty hearing Frank. So, Ron,
I don't think Ron can hear us.
No, I can hear you, Scott.
Okay, because Frank is trying to ask a question.
Yeah, Frank is trying to get in there. So go ahead, Frank, go ahead. No?
Unfortunately, there's Frank. Yeah, I'm asking him to unmute himself, but.
There I go. Am I better now?
Yes.
Yes.
So Ron, when you look at the area that you're offering to configure for agriculture and not housing, and I appreciate that because obviously you're responding to master plan goals to keep most of the land available for agriculture. My question is, how likely is it that these limitations you're proposing will prompt people who pay a premium to live in this kind of a neighborhood to come back and say, I don't know what they were thinking when they thought we could do what we want to do, but if I didn't have these restrictions, I'd have 15 acres. I could put anything on wherever I want, but now it's like if I'm in the farmland preservation program. And I'm concerned because I've seen it happen in other towns where people.
Yeah, and I'd say that, Frank, it's the same question that we get every time someone looks at a piece of property that is some form of preservation, whether it's a local preservation or whether it's an SADC easement or a county easement. I mean, I'm sitting with those buyers all the time reviewing that, and they got this little box on whether it's a 10 acre tract or a 200 acre tract, and they got a 1 acre exception or 1.5 acre exception. And that's pretty commonplace out here, not only in Bedminster, but a lot of the environs out here where you're sitting with buyers and you're going through what you can and can't do in these areas. And you know, you've had it. I'm sure you've seen the same thing where you have those restrictions, and it's part of the title chain. It's part of any approvals there, and it has that we want to give it the same weight that an SADC easement would have.
And I appreciate what you're saying, Ron. Thank you for the answer.
Ron, could you go back to your other map, your subdivision map, where I wanted to see the roadway?
I can.
In lot 15, the rear of 15, your roadway goes through the lot, and I believe that's 12-9.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, does that cause an easement for that lot, or, how do we deal with that roadway going through that lot?
Well, again, it would have to be part of the acre and a half. And it would just be a common driveway easement that would exist over someone else's lot.
Okay, and then does that create, I mean, because that's going to be their personal driveway for snow removal and things, does that,
Well, in this configuration, from the point of the cul-de-sac to where
Yeah.
it splits, that would be common, that there would be some arrangement for sharing. And then from the split, it would be individual lot owner 1209 and 1501. But I'll say this is that configuration. I mean, there's dozens of lots in Bedminster that are configured similar to this, that are on Lamington Road, on Long Lane, on Larger Cross Road, that we have, you know, a common driveway and for a certain distance, and then it splits into individual driveways. And they've existed. I mean, I've been doing them for 25, maybe 30 years out here now in these, and they exist. And I haven't had problems where we've had to get called in to referee a fight on those things. I'm not sure the town has, but
okay, but I think we just have to deal with it, not,
yeah, it's part of the culture
Part
of
of it.
living in
Yeah.
this part of the you know, state or a neighborhood that you have common driveways.
and that will be paved, is that correct?
Well, we're showing them all as paved. And
Right,
again,
okay.
I'd say this from, you know, what I don't want to do is say that it's all going to be stone and then they go and pave it and it's a problem. So
Mhm.
from a lot coverage standpoint, which accounts, from a stormwater management standpoint, from an approval standpoint, I typically say that we're going to pave these driveways and allow that. Some owners choose, they only want gravel. And which is, you know, fine from I don't think there's a restriction that they couldn't just have a gravel there. I think the only thing that Paul has said before per your ordinance is, I don't know if it's over 5% or 7%, some slope that Paul's had as a standard. If it goes over that slope, we want that driveway paved. And I forget what that standard is. But for the most part, we get them approved as this, as allowing paved. And in some cases, they have them as stone. In other cases, they pave them.
All right, I'll open it up to the board. Any questions the board might have?
Madam Chairman, this is Mr.
Yes.
Collins. I
Yes.
just need to do some housekeeping here. We have,
Okay,
so Ron, you pre-marked some exhibits as A4 and A5. You've talked about A4, which is the environmental constraints map as adjusted. You've also now talked about you didn't talk so much about A5, which is the subdivision map, I think, with the additional lot if the Board of Health approves it. Then you had what we should call now an A6 for the, let's say, typical farmhouse and farm plan for, I think it might have been lot 15.
It's a sample farmhouse plan, Tom, on the drawing.
Okay, so that'll be A6, and A7 was that overall farm drawing.
It says agricultural
Cultural
conceptual
plan.
rendering.
Okay,
Mhm.
good. And would you just maybe put up A6 and just, I'm sorry, A5 and just describe it quickly, and then we can do the question.
This one?
A6, I'm sorry, A5, the subdivision plan, I believe it is, the revised subdivision plan.
Yeah.
It's called subdivision layout rendering.
Yep, subdivision layout. Hold on, I gotta scroll over there. Yeah, subdivision, hold on, it's not scrolling correctly. Subdivision layout rendering dated June 11th, 2020.
Okay, and that's basically what you talked about before, but
The
that's
plan.
with the,
Correct.
it's with like keep getting the, assuming the Board of Health approves the extra lot and laying it
Well,
out.
I show that as an option, but you know, I'm showing it combined, but I still have that line on there. If the Board of Health
Okay.
approves it, we'd come back and amend our application.
Okay. So now, Madam Chairman, we're ready for questions.
Okay, well, the board, do you have any questions?
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes?
This is Colin.
Oh, yes.
Paul, what would be the reasons to grant relief from a lot circle requirements as well as the resource conservation calculations? Can you just summarize that and refresh my memory?
Well, I think really that's probably a better question for Frank to answer relative to the the legal standards for relief for variances like this, because it's really Frank's planning world.
Sounds good.
That was really lame, Paul. You've been a planner for years now. I keep telling people you're a great planner.
Well played.
Well, I'll follow your lead, Paul. What were you thinking from the planning perspective?
I was thinking the rationalization would have to be along the lines of a C2 variance, right?
And the merits would have to be significant, because even though, if you're asking what magic is there to a 500-foot circle, there really isn't magic to that. But the shaping and other controls that we had on lots that would limit how many houses ended up in farmland were all part of an overall plan to try to manage the intensity of future development. So when we now see it being played out and somebody says, well, if I could just get this variance, I could have 9 lots instead of 8, or 9 instead of 7. I think the board is challenged by the master plan objective. And we're going to hear, I mean, I'm not trying to prejudge anything about the applicant's case. We've been told he's going to lay out some very important facts about how he would better manage these farmlands so that they meet our master plan objectives. I don't want to prejudge that in any way, but I do think that when we start looking at extra lots and you need an overriding, a compelling reason to grant the variance, it's got to resonate with all of those requirements. And if it's a C variance, there's either a hardship, which there is not here, or there's some public benefit that's overwhelming enough that it merits some additional development. And that's what we're here to hear. So, like I said, I haven't prejudged that.
And Frank, some of the things that I'll say is, from our standpoint, when we put this together, is the relief on these circles are based on the configurations on the existing conditions, not necessarily what's being proposed. I'm not showing a road and showing, 200-foot wide lots and 800-foot deep and have 6 of those in a row. I mean, it's borne by the existing conditions that are there, with this lot on 15 being only just over 500 feet, 510 feet, let's say. So under any condition, there's no reasonable expectation that I could create a lot circle in here by reconfiguring this space to make that work. So I'll take an example. If this lot was not 1,000 foot deep, let's say it was 2,000 foot deep and it was 50 acres, I'd have that same condition. That would never change if these 2 parallel lines didn't get any wider anywhere at all. That would never change. So the notion that the board put a 500-foot circle in there is to have normal lot size, not long, skinny lots. I understand that. That's the purpose of this. In this case, it's borne by the existing condition that we're faced with there that is not changeable. And likewise, I think on lot 21, it's similar in the sense is the environ around that existing home site that has an historic development pattern associated with that older house that's there, an older farmhouse. It has that same narrowness to that lot that I can't change. I can't go make that. I can obviously go buy the neighboring property, but there's a beautiful house right next to it. And then there's a house complex with the barn on the other side. So I can't go make that comply by changing any of the lot configurations in order to make that happen. That exists as a long, skinny lot in this component here, not the excess land that we're subdividing over to 21.04, but in the neighborhood or in the environ around the house site, that's what exists. So any of the other newer lots that are being proposed, we're complying. It's those 2 areas are borne by, I'll say, the historic development patterns, the existing lot configuration, as opposed to us putting that on new lots that we're squeezing another lot out because we're putting, we're not going to comply with the 500-foot lot circle.
Thank you, Ron. I think
that's how I view the relief we're looking for on those particular issue, as opposed to the relief that would be for the resource conservation calculations.
To the extent that I suggested that you could not qualify for hardship relief, it was more intended to reflect the fact that if there is relief needed to get extra lots, the fact that the existing lot configurations might otherwise merit some variance relief if it was the only way to get a house on the lot, I'm not sure means that you should be able to get extra houses because you can't get the circle in this part of the overall holdings that are being rendered for subdivision. But I think you did a good job explaining the applicant's position. Thank you.
Thank you. That was helpful, I think, for all the board. Any other board member have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead,
Hello?
Nick.
Nick, that's Nick.
Yeah, Nick.
Okay.
Yeah, the question's probably more for Frank. On that table on page 8, there's this column called required area. Could you say a few words about what goes into calculating a required area?
And Nick, that was in my report. And what that is, it goes for the individual lot resource constraint calculations, because the ordinance says you have to have a certain amount of essentially unconstrained lot area on a lot. So what the calculations do is they go through and determine how much constrained area there is and comes up with a total. And then you add the minimum lot area, in this case 10, to that number, and you come up with the figure. For example, remaining lot 12, there's 6.65 acres of constrained land. So you need a minimum of 16.65 acres to have the 10 clear acres that the ordinance envisions.
Oh, okay. So 10 acres is not enough. Depends on what's on that 10 acres. If it was just a dry piece of land, no water or slopes or anything, 10 would be enough.
That's correct, because your resource constraint subtracts would be 0.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Paul, to follow up on that, can you talk about how the easement on, what is it, lot 12, how that affects this calculation, the resource conservation calculation?
There is a large conservation easement on the tract to the rear. The way the resource constraint calculation works, it says that you have to subtract out any conservation easement that's part of a subdivision or site plan and can't count that towards your lot numbers. In this particular case, this was an older easement that was granted privately and not part of a subdivision or a site plan. So that land would not be subtracted out.
Wait. I would like you to explain that further because I'm not sure about that. I thought this easement was for the public benefit, for the public good, and that the township recognized it as such.
Well, that may be the case, George. It's certain, any conservation easement obviously is for the public good. The issue as it relates to the ordinance is, was that easement required as part of a subdivision or site plan application before the land use board? And the answer to that question is no. So it is not subtracted as part of the resource constraints calculations.
So if in fact it was subtracted, how would that impact? What would the result be?
It's hard to say, but obviously there'd be substantially less area available.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Lou?
I've got a quick question.
Business Ann, please identify yourself before you
Sorry.
speak.
Can we talk about, so we can't have a single lot span the access road? I'm talking about lot 21.
Sure. Let me talk about that for a minute. There's two different things going on here. Any lot must have road frontage. That road can be public road or private road. In this case, they have a private road with a private road right-of-way that you can see running up from Lamington Road, heading back and turning right into lot 12. That is the public road right-of-way. Lots end at the street line. The street line is the right-of-way line. So in this particular case, there's a lot on the left and there's a lot on the right. If you look at Ron's map and where his arrow is now coming down that driveway, you'll see that orange line. That lot line really needs to be coincident with the right-of-way line. Okay, because right now, as he depicts it, there is land on the east side of that driveway
Right.
that is part of the lot on the west side. And that's really not correct. Now, also, you can have an easement, just as the common driveway easement that goes across lot 1209. That is a different story. That's a private driveway access easement and not the private road right-of-way. That doesn't provide frontage to any of the lots. It provides access. So it's different and does not divide the properties. It's not a street line.
Okay. And so, Paul, if we were disinclined to grant the easement on the remaining lot 21 for some reason, we'd still have a problem with where the road goes because lot 21 would span the road, right?
Yes, if for example, you wanted to say, take the lot on the west side where the existing house is, and you wanted to say, well, that's not a lot that we're going to create as part of this subdivision. If you run the road up as it is, well, then you have some land area that's sitting out there. I think Ron mentioned it. It could be created as an open space lot. It could be set up so it's actually part of the private road right-of-way. It's got a minimum width of 50 feet, but it could be 300 feet wide, and that could all be part of the right-of-way instead of a separate building lot. As it's set up, and when I'm talking about lots, I'm talking about building lots that are on either side of the street.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Lou, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Lou.
Okay, Ron, I want to try to break this down. This is, it's quite a complicated presentation. Per each lot, one area is the conservation restriction area. Is that correct?
What do you mean by one area?
Well,
on a lot?
It seems that each lot has different areas that we have to be concerned with. For example, each lot has an environmental restricted area. Each lot has an agriculturally preserved area. Each lot has a farmhouse, half-acre exception area. Each lot has a right-of-way driveway or a common road. Is there any way that you could break that down into a few sentences so that we can understand what each lot, what are the concerns with as an individual lot?
So the easiest way to look at that as far as the numbers is the packet that was submitted to you by us has individual worksheets for each of those lots. So if I go and look at that, let me just grab it. So the packet that, when we kill 12 trees every time we make a submission to any township, we give you yields for calculations for each lot. And so, and as an example, on one of the pages here, it's proposed lot 12.08. It has bodies of water and it has 2.88 acres and it has a conservation ratio of 1. It has areas existing of conservation easements, deed restrictions, blah, blah, blah. There's 0 in there. Slopes in excess of 25, 0. Slopes 15 to 25, 0. DEP required wetlands, transition areas, 3.167. Areas of category 1, there's 0. So it goes through those calculations and it shows what's constrained and what's not constrained in the lot. So these are ones that are in your ordinance that we do for each lot. And it shows those areas, again, that are constrained and not constrained. When we do this particular one on 12.08, it shows that we comply because there's more than 10 acres that is non-constrained based on these formulas.
Okay, so just one more follow-up question. The farmland, the farmhouse exception area, does that include the driveway up to the house?
Yeah, our intent is, yes. Our intent is to use the driveway and the area along the driveway as well as the house and around the house as the farmland exception.
So for lot, I think it's 15.2, the top one.
I'll show you that one. This one?
Yeah. 15.2.
Yep. So this has the driveway and that's exception in the exception area. It has
Okay.
the, turnaround, and then the house and the pool, if they're doing a pool, or patios, that's all in the 1.5 acres.
So what you're proposing is that each lot will have a 1.5 acre exception area, and some lots will have longer driveways and use up a portion of their 1.5 acres in driveway, and other lots may not have quite as long of a driveway. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, that would happen.
Okay,
Generally,
that's
though,
great.
I mean, there's not that are huge long, in some cases, if they're hundreds and hundreds of feet long, it becomes a problem, but I don't see that in this particular, layout based on where the private road is.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board member? Any other board?
Walter. Tim Walter, I have a couple questions.
Yes, go ahead.
All right, bear with me. I'm the new guy.
That's all right. You take your time.
Couple questions. In reference to Cole's letter to us, item number 3, and just help me with this. I'm also looking at what was submitted by Ron and the team about the conservation area. I see a lot size, lot amount of 7. Then I also see 6. And then in B, if we look at the individual lots, it's only 4. So, I mean, this is an area that we're trying to limit development on in the first place, unless there's an extraordinary benefit, which I think the extraordinary benefit here is being presented to us as this unique farming aspect. But are we guaranteeing that this unique farming aspect is going to be part of it? Is it conditional about this? Or could all these homes be built and this unique farming aspect just go away? I mean, that's a question I have.
Tim, let me, before you go on, let me try to answer your first question first.
Okay.
And that was, why is there 7? Why is there 6? Why is there something else in those resource constraint calculations? The resource constraint calculations for a subdivision really need to be done twice. The first is you look at the overall tract area, you run the numbers, and you determine how many lots you can get out of the tract as of right. And you have that number and you round it down. Okay, that's the first calculation. And that's where if you take the sum of all these lots, that's where you come up with 7.1, or 7 lots is the maximum that you can get out of the tract.
Okay,
the other calculation is if you look at each of the individual lots, you have 1 point something, 1 point something, and 4 point something. And you round those off to 1, 1, and 4, and they add up to 6. Okay? Then the second half of the calculation is you must go back and proof out each individual lot. And that's where the minimum required lot area, for example, for remaining lot 12, needs to be 16.65 acres. So after you run the overall tract yield, you look at each individual lot to make sure it has enough clear area to be considered buildable. And that somewhat goes back to Lou's question about how you have resource constrained areas on each lot and farmhouse exception areas. The resource constrained areas are not necessarily in conservation easements on all these lots, and it's not necessarily a fact that they can't be developed in any way. The idea of the ordinance is to increase the overall area of the lot, so you don't have to go in there and you don't have to do these things in order to be able to build out the lots. So I think that hopefully answers your first question, Tim, as to where those different numbers come from.
So what is the standard? Which number should we look at? Or should we look at all 3? Should we look at 7, 6, and 4?
Well, I think you have to, the first number you have to look at, in my opinion, is 7, because you have 3 lots that have come in for a subdivision. Okay? So if you take the 3 lots that are in there and combine it into a single tract, then the lot yield from that tract is 7 with a big asterisk. The asterisk is each of those 7 lots must comply with the individual lot requirements.
And do this.
And that's where my chart in comment B comes in, where it says 4 of those lots do comply with that standard. 4 of the I guess 9 that are proposed.
And the 3 do not.
Well, there's actually 9 lots proposed. So the overall number of lots is 9, where the resource constraints tract yield would be 7. And the proofed out lots, for lack of a better term, is 4.
But Paul, stay on. You were talking about 7, and then you switched to 9. Can you give us
Yeah, seven is
based,
what
based on 7.
7 is what the calculation says you can get. 9 is the ask.
Right, but of those 7, you said 3 or 4 of them aren't in compliance. Is that what?
No, I'm saying only 4 of the 9 comply. I didn't look at 7 lots because 7 lots is not part of the proposal. And to some extent, when you have, right now they're proposing 1207, which is a combination of 1206 and 1207, that does comply, okay? But once you break those apart, then they don't comply. And then I guess really of the 9 lots that you would have, 3 would comply with the resource constraints. If you had 8 lots, 4 would comply. If you had 9 lots, 3 would comply.
And if you had 7 lots?
Yes.
4.
You'd have to combine some of these together.
No, you would.
No,
That's your job.
let me rephrase that. One would have to combine those lots.
Okay, this is Tim again. So there would be more calculation involved if the applicant presented 7 or was suggesting a 7.
Correct. Correct.
Tim, if I could just add one thing, the applicant's really asking you to find that the benefits of what they are proposing is, what's the ratio of 9/7 subtract the 2, whatever, it's that much better, that it's going to do a better job of meeting your master plan objectives. And I think we have to listen to the proofs on that, because that's a very strong part that the applicant wants to demonstrate. And I think they have to have a chance to do that. But you're good to be skeptical about whether more development without the right controls is really what the R10 zone is trying to see happen.
And in regard to that, the benefit that they're explaining, which it seems like a very neat idea. I know they've done this in Basking Ridge. Is there any guarantee that it will be successful and that it won't just, hey, we got our 9 homes and hey, we're not going to do that after all, and there's no way you can hold it. Let's do that. Yes, no?
Ron,
Ron, you should answer that.
Look at it, Tim, is the primary issue is the restriction that it can't be used for residential environment. I think that's the most important thing. Whether if the elements of the agricultural goals that Jim has stated, if some of those go away, it's still an agricultural area on each one of these lots. You can't turn it into something else. I mean, right now it's an underperforming, before Jim bought it, an underperforming hayfield. And on this lot that I'm pointing to now, just had horses all over the place, had consolidated soils and compacted soils all over the place. It was a mess. And they've cleaned it up substantially from what is there today. So there is a benefit of these, even if the purity of some of the elements that Jim has proposed does not ultimately work out the way he has it visioned. The protection is you still have this agricultural area around there.
But we would have had that even with 7 lots.
They didn't plow the fields. They didn't do anything. Then it's going to have vegetation that's going to grow up. It's going to turn back into a forested area within 20 years. I'm taking extreme examples, but it's going to be almost like an open space that you're not going to be able to allow to do things that are inconsistent with the rules and the restrictions that would be established for the agricultural side of things.
But wouldn't we have that same benefit with 7 lots? People with the 7 lots, they couldn't do anything additional.
Sure, no, because if I did the 7 lots, I don't need the relief that we're asking for, other than what we have on lot 15 right now for the lot circle and the back, and that we wouldn't have to offer those restrictions because it would be an as of right plan. We would have the zoning plan that would totally conform to your ordinance, and under that scenario, there would be no need to offer that.
Offer what?
Offer the restriction of 1.5 acres of residential development, and the rest in open space.
Yeah, but there'd be 2 lots.
Ron, are you saying Ron, are you saying 7 lots would meet both of those requirements, the qualification for the number of lots and each lot qualifying? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
To get 7?
Yeah, and the only exception would be on the 7, the only exception would be is on this lot 15, we have approval already for that, that if you said we're not going to grant you the additional 2 lots, then we would come in for a conforming subdivision with no restrictions, and I can go put the house, well, in this case, we agreed already to put the house 400 foot back, but I could put the house, I can make a bigger house, I can make a bigger environment, I can put a tennis court, I can put all these areas within the setbacks, and I don't have to have farming on this. If a 7 lot comes in and we would come in with a conforming subdivision. So the delta we're talking about here is the differences in 2 lots that wouldn't conform with the environmental constraints. And in doing that, we're offering the 1.5 acres on all 9 lots. If we don't, you say here, we're not going to grant you that. We're only going to do what's conforming. Then we'd be back to a 7 lot subdivision with no constraints, or excuse me, no restrictions that would be put on this, and you can build to the zoning limits.
Is that correct, Paul? Would 7 lots conform to the resource constraint calculations that you've done in Table B?
Well, I didn't do the calculations, and the answer is I don't know. I'd have to see the numbers.
So that's okay. So we're guessing 7 would work.
I thought Ron said that 7 meet the first part of the test and 4 met the second part. Maybe I misunderstood that.
No, let's be clear, because I don't want to confuse that, because we're getting into a lot of things, what conforms and doesn't conform. When we start talking about the site, and I'm going to pull up this other screen here, okay, of the layout itself. When we start talking about this, when we talk about conforming, there is 4 lots in the rear on lot 12 that would conform to all the standards, including the resource conservation calculations, including the lot circle, including the frontage and the setbacks. That would be 4 in the rear. There would only be 1 lot in the front on lot 21 because of the issues that we talked about. So that's 5. And then we already have 2 lots approved here. That's the 7. So it would be 7 lots. We'd have to meet with any of the conditions on lot 15 that were approved already. But on the other 4 plus 1, the other 5 lots, we would ask for a subdivision that would have no additional restrictions other than any typical subdivision that would have. There's still things like conservation easements along some of the stream corridors, but it's not in the developed portion of the site. So we would have a plan that would be approved, that we'd have 4 lots in the back, 1 lot here, and we could put more on it, more than what we're proposing. So what we're asking for is an additional 5th lot in the back and 1 additional lot on lot 21. And for the benefit of us doing that, we're willing on all the lots, including the lots on 15, to put this 1.5 acre farmhouse exception on the property and leave the rest of it as agricultural. And again, if I take the 1.5 acres times 9 lots, plus the 1.5 acres about for the road, that's 15 acres of non-agricultural use on a 113 acre piece of land. To me, that's pretty substantial. And that's
Ron,
more
I
than
think I have a question, Ron.
you would get for 10 acre lots.
It's Mayor Jacobs. How many acres is the conservation easement?
Larry, you broke up on me. I couldn't hear you.
The conservation easement that runs to Irwa, RK?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I know. I think it's about 29.25
10 acres. That's in the unconstrained area.
I think it's about 29 acres and change.
It could be, George, but you see this is, it's constrained in here, so it's in our calculations already. So the unconstrained area, I'd say, is about 10 acres.
You know, I think it's important.
But you're double, to some extent, you're double counting because that area is already off limits for development.
Well, we're counting in the conservation area for Irwa, we're counting these lands back here that are in your different calculations for wetlands and floodplain and the like.
No, I understand, but when you're talking about the 98 acres that would be covered by this easement that's being offered to us, you know, if George is right, it's 30 acres or I'm not sure if it's more than that. That area is already restricted.
Yeah, well, I'll give you some other numbers too, just to get the total area that's being in open fields today. I have that here somewhere. That's in current open fields that we would continue is actually improvement.
Ron, while you're checking that out, is it fair to say that the real proposition here is a free farmland preservation easement over however many acres you're going to say can't be developed? Is that really why we would give you 2 more lots instead of 7 or 6?
Correct. We're taking the area that we could use that's outside the constrained area, even outside the Irwa easement, that we could do disturbances on that are free of environmental constraints, comply with zoning, and we could put things in that area. And our goal is to limit that area.
Okay, let me ask you one
Restrict
other
that
question.
area.
Good. Just one other question. If you were to have if the board were to decide that the merits of your proposal were great and that maybe you were not reserving enough land for somebody to use for residential purposes in Bedminster's estate area, and they said maybe it should be 3 acres, you would probably make the same argument about whatever remaining farmland is protected as a result. And I think the fact that you've adhered to the farmland preservation benchmark guidelines for this sort of thing is great. But I also think that when people buy the kind of lot you're talking about being created here, they're going to expect to be able to fully execute the lifestyle of this part of Bedminster that people move here for. So I would only ask that you think a little more and tell us a little more about what, if it wasn't 1.5 acres for all of those farmland preservation based purposes, might be the number you know, because you've done a lot of this kind of work in this part of the world.
So again, it goes to so specific to the property and what they want to achieve on some of these things. I mean, some of them are truly agricultural based, so the house environment's quite small, no matter what size the house is. And then the agricultural or even the equestrian routes around it is pretty large. In other cases, the estate house and the environs around the state take up 5 acres, you know, because it's the pool, it's the tennis court, it's the, you know, a barn that is not for horses, but for 20 or 30 cars that they're storing in there because they show cars.
Right. So Ron, if we don't want to have 5 or 6 or 7 people come back and ask us for variances from what we agreed to for this subdivision, what would be the right amount of land for them to have available for their residential use where we would never see them again?
Well, I can say this is Jim's here. He's met with a lot of these buyers that he's been talking to about these lots. Maybe he can give you a little insight into that.
I don't think we're there yet. It's
Right.
It's Larry again.
Okay.
I still have questions before Frank jumped in there. In your 1.5 acres, and we're calling it an exception area as if we're treating it as an SADC type farmland preservation easement, which I do not believe this is. What are you proposing in the 1.5 acres? I mean, we see this example. What are you looking at house sizes? What are you looking at other accessory improvements going around that 1.5 acres?
So we would say, you know, the typical house itself, the courtyards, the patios, pool, anything that would be in a typical environ around there. But again, we're not looking for the things that would have the big tennis courts, the big, elements that are in an expansive type of acre and a half area. That's what we're trying to avoid here, and people that want to be in these type of environments. So what we're showing is the area along the driveway, the area around the houses, and we can put some, if there's something specific that we say we don't want, let's talk about it.
Well, so what sizes are the houses?
Yeah, I mean, Jim has some ideas about what he thinks the house size was going to be because he's met with those buyers. I haven't.
Hey guys, if I could step in here just for a second, because you are asking Ron some things that really deal with the architecture and the interplay with the agriculture, and I think it's really important questions. Just want to see if Ron can mute here for a second. So,
please state your name.
You guys understand what how many square feet are in an acre? We just go back to a definition, for example.
Okay.
So,
who's speaking right now? I'm sorry.
101 class.
Who is speaking right now?
It was
Hello?
Jim Down. I just muted him. So you're going to have to.
You need to identify yourself. Yes.
I'm sorry. Well, it's Jim Downs. I apologize. I thought I.
And Tom has to swear you in.
Yes, Jim, you understand you're still under oath from the prior hearing.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And please go ahead.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
There's an echo, Jim. You might have two mics on.
Yeah, we're all trying to be here in the same place. The last time we had obviously I had technical difficulties and I apologize about that. I had Zoomed 3 times earlier that day and twice the next day, never had that problem. So I apologize. I was like the school kid all dressed up on his first day and I missed the bus. But in any event, I wanted to answer Larry's question and a lot of people's concerns about getting that spirit of Bedminster estate out of something where we're proposing an acre and a half farmhouse exception area. If an acre is 43,560 square feet, basically, you're talking about roughly 70,000 square feet in an acre and a half. If you start adding up even your most prominent home and a driveway and a courtyard and a garage and a pool and a tennis court, you add all that stuff up and you allow your agriculture to feather into as a farmhouse would be on a farm, because we're about creating a farm. We're not looking at these things as all these little separate little nodes. We've placed these farmhouse exception areas in areas that make sense on us developing a farm, with the farm as the primary concern. And people coming to live here, the hope is that the idea of an agricultural environmental neighborhood where clean air, clean water, clean food, and sustainable infrastructure means something to somebody, that's the amenity for them. It's more important than a lot of those things, yet they still get those things. So if you just add it up, you have 70,000 square feet, even in an acre and a half, and we're under normal farmland preservation residential exception area of 2 acres. Sometimes that's even, ratcheted up a bit. But if you wanted to build a 10,000 square foot house, you could do it with a 5,000 square foot footprint, for example. Your driveway could be no more than 5,000 square feet. You would have a pool that you couldn't imagine having 5,000 square foot of pool, but you could. And you could have another 5,000 square foot of patios. You could even add another 5,000 square feet for a courtyard. And if you wanted to add another 5,000 square feet for a secondary building that you put cars in, that's only 30,000 feet, guys. I'm 40,000 feet shy of the acre and a half exception area. So we're not giving them a postage stamp. There's towns like Mendham and Bernardsville where they would build on an acre and a half a much bigger scenario. But we think that farmhouse architecture that's indicative of the regions and in the community itself, and you could build a stately home on an acre and a half exception area, absolutely, if that's the goal. But I don't think we're going to attract people that want to come in and look for a variance on this. And when you sell something into farmland preservation, or you have an easement on that's to IRWA or somebody else, these easements last. And Bedminster has a rich history of easements all over the place. There's easements about equestrian trails potentially that one of the reasons one of my lot circles couldn't possibly fit is that it would bifurcate a horse trail that's kind of significant to this property. So we've laid this out, and if you look at the driveways are following tree lines. There's a reason they're following tree lines. Is that historically, when you farm a field, you keep a tractor road, some people call it a farm road, around the perimeter of a field, and you drive up against a tree line because that's where the best soil typically is, the best turf or sod, as the farmers will call it. So if you look at my plan, as opposed to the engineering plan, which is, you'll see that the roads follow existing tractor roads. So we're not even taking that out of farm that we're now starting to create. We actually have a tractor road there. The difference is with the private road, we can come down the road with a tractor, right? Or parallel the road, and we can go into a field that before we had to go 360 degrees around it and destroy a lot of the land that was there, that we're doing now, is because that's the way we need to get there. We don't have a farm road. So we're caused to do these circuitous routes around every one of those separate fields that are bordered by tree lines. We're not taking one tree out. So the idea of creating an environmental conservation neighborhood aligns with the master plan that, in 2005, people that I greatly revere that are on this, day said that we can explore techniques and options for creating better land for conservation and land stewardship. And we're not destroying farmland, we're creating it. There is no farmland here. There's no viable farmland here, other than my partner and I buying this 4 years ago and putting it into cover cropping, organic care, and trying to rebuild soil health, waterway health. We've done an incredible amount of work, and and this is a building process. So the idea of this farm, it's not going to attract everybody. If somebody wants to build a tower here, or somebody wants to build something that's not appropriate for Bedminster, they're not going to be looking at this Bedminster farm area to be part of an agricultural and conservation community that they couldn't possibly bust up. The worst thing that could happen is if for some reason someone decided that regenerative agriculture that creates a healthy biota, waterway, food, and a sense of community. If for some reason 5 or 10 years from now that becomes a horrible idea, and sustainability of that becomes a horrible idea, then they could put it back into the lousy way it was being handled before, by allowing someone to trample horses there to the point where there was no soil left. And they still got farmland assessment from the town of Bedminster because they thought that the horses were agriculture, but they weren't breeding them. And the hay field or the cornfield where the crop rotted in the field for 3 years, and they tilled in order to get it. And then they tilled in the winter and allowed it to run off into the waterways, and they heavily dosed it with herbicides and fertilizers. That's not great land stewardship. So, I'm really proud of creating something that complies with the master plan and ask for relief on resource constraints where we're not building in any constrained areas. You realize that they are protected as far as we're concerned, and as far as everybody else is concerned, the constrained areas are in fact constrained, but we're creating our own constrained areas. And I would argue that creating 90 to 100 acres of new agricultural areas that include woodland management areas not previously part of woodland management, about 50 acres of that, and 40 acres of what I'm calling absolutely new farmland that is regenerative. And so when you see a sheep pasture or a horse pasture, or you see an orchard, or you see fields, realize that they're all there for proper rotational grazing to rebuild soil health, so that the amenity of this farm is to have a beautiful landscape that you go. A beautiful farm is as beautiful as any landscaped manicured lawn that requires so much water and so much fertilizer, and is really not friendly to the environment. You might argue that a golf course might not be friendly to the environment, but does look beautiful. In the case of a regenerative farm, it looks beautiful, it works beautiful, it enhances the environment, enhances the experience for the people that live there and for the community as a whole. So the addition of a community garden, building back orchards, you could go there and see apple trees right now that for 60 years, according to the legacy farmer and the owners, never produced fruit. Well, we pruned them and we adjusted the pH on the soil completely naturally, and now we have apples coming out for the first time in 40 years. Jack Vreeland came out and said, "Oh my God, I've never seen an apple on this tree." And then we planted 50 more. So this is more about the story of creating a neighborhood At the end of the day, the average lot size is 13 acres. The minimum lot size is 10.5 acres. The maximum lot size is 15.5. The average size is 13. And we're restricting the development of residential, yes, to 1.5 acres, but I don't see us even approaching that. Our design constraints that I'm a sustainability architect and engineer and have been since 1980. This is what I've done. This is not something new. This has been a focus of mine and a passion for a long time. And I've been a consultant to, industry and government on this. So I feel that 1.5 acres is more than enough to do whatever needs to be done. In fact, it could be smaller. Or we could take an FAR and say, look, your FAR in your code is 8%. If someone does the calculation, takes a 15-acre lot that we have. So if you talk about one of the lots that wouldn't be constrained, take a 15-acre lot, do 15 times 43,560 and take 8% of that. Now, you'll never get there because there's lot coverage and other issues, but your ordinance would allow an extraordinary amount of structure that really doesn't need to be there, because the amenity farm creates a common area amenity, creates things that you don't have to put there. So I've gone through the math, and like I said, I've been an architectural engineer for 40 years. 1.5 acres does more than enough to create the sense of wealth or prestige, along with being respectful of the agriculture that's not just surrounding it, but part of it. And so if you saw the plan that I did for the front lot of 15, not only do we take down the house that's sitting up against the road, if you looked at the lot coverage of that existing house, we could literally go in there, take the house down and rebuild it exactly where it is. It complies, it's 200 feet from the road. And there's probably 20,000 square foot of garbage, asphalt and curb and all sorts of stuff that's there that no one really wants to see. It's an artificial grade. It's no longer a pasture. It was a very long time ago, but probably not in 100.
Thanks, Jim. I think you've answered our question there. Mayor, have you got anything else you want to ask Jim?
Geez, I think I remember the questions I had before.
I got a couple of questions.
Who's this?
This is Rich, and I'm sorry for joining late. I just got caught up in something here, and somebody stop me if I'm asking questions that have already been asked.
Go ahead, Rich.
So first of all, I'm looking at the correspondence, and the correspondence says we're adjusting the application to 8 lots, but now we're talking about 9. So I'm a little bit confused about what the ask is. Is the ask 8 lots or 9?
Ron, are you there?
I'm here. So today it's 8 lots because of the 2 combined lots that we have to go get the board health approval.
And
what
is
the ask
that?
today is 8, but in the planning aspect of this, because these 2 lots are showing combined, it's actually the 9th, it's the 9th lot. That's the combined 2. I'm just showing the right exhibit.
Does it.
So to Rich's answer is that the 12.06 and 12.07 for this purpose is combined because we don't have Board of Health approval on 12.06.
Okay.
But when we start talking about the math, Rich, and everything else, it's still based on 9 lots. So I don't want to be disingenuous in not showing that lot. But it's not for that approval. If it was approved, it would have to combine 12.06.
So at some point you would come back to us and try to get the 9th lot. Is that the point?
That's correct.
Okay.
Tim Walter here.
We don't have Board of Health approval.
You're not asking for that now.
That clears up my confusion about what the ask is.
Okay, good.
All right. My second question is, we're talking about all this farmland preservation that's going on. And I want the way I'm understanding this in my mind, that this is like a farming club, and that I'm not trying to disparage anything, Jim, but that's the way I'm characterizing it. It's a farming club. These are not 9 disparate owners with their own ideas about how to manage this property from an agricultural or farming perspective. They're buying into this vision that you very articulately put. Maybe a little too salesy, Jim, but I get it. So they're buying into this vision, and you or some third party is managing the farmland?
Great question, Rich. Let me make sure that everybody else is muted so I don't have crosstalk. We're building a farm. You know, the reality is we're creating a farm management team. Right now, that team exists in a combination of direct hire employees as we're starting to build this, because we've been rebuilding soil health since we've owned the properties. We knew that that's the biggest challenge here. So we've started that process. Cover cropping, no-till farming, doing a lot of, organic management. So we're doing that with a combination of direct hire employees that have worked for my company for a period of time, some long, some short. Also legacy farmers, people that have been on this farm area in the neighborhood, people that have been either hay farming or farming grains, doing different things. We're obviously have met with the Agricultural Committee, Taylor James. We work with the Ag Commission, the Ag Extension, Farmer Darren Jaffe, who's online today, Farmer D. So we've created this ag plan by really getting in, starting with soil tests, talking to legacy farmers from the area, people that may have farmed this area in the past when it was farmed. Part of the property was farmed, and we got to understand the practices and why things were certain ways. And along with the Ag Extension chief and other consultants and myself, we're starting this to build this team. So at the end of the day, yes, an on-site team rather than landscapers with tractors and trailers coming down Lamington Road, bringing their hay wagons. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think that the idea of having on-site management where we own the equipment and we have the staff to come in and take care of managing the farm around you. We're using the expression to the homeowners that desire this kind of living and are excited about it, is that they have the opportunity without the obligation to get involved in the farming aspects. And I think every one of us has a little farmer in us or a little gardener in us or something, whether it's the horses aspect or the sheep or the chickens or fruits or vegetables, whatever it is. We all try to grow tomatoes in New Jersey so we get one big tomato in the end of August. But everybody has an appreciation for fresh produce grown locally, and to be thrust in the middle of this, for some people, is extraordinarily exciting because they understand that the land around them is being stewarded in an organic and healthy manner. And so they do not have they have no obligation, they have the opportunity. So we are encouraging in the design to have their kitchen gardens sort of reflect the kitchen garden that we have put outside the existing farmhouse, for example. And people say, well, what's a kitchen garden? Well, when you come to see our community garden, which you're entitled to CSA shares in because you're a homeowner, you can have something small like that for herbs and small vegetables in your garden outside your home. We're like, that's a great idea.
Is that the way their ownership works, Jim? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is that the way their ownership works? They would own a share of this farm, and depending on how large a share they owned, they select the lot that they're looking at, or do they buy? Do they have deed title to each one of these lots?
Everybody's equal. Everybody has the same share of anything that's produced on the farm, realizing that we're not just producing food for human consumption, because none of these lots do currently, right? The idea is to have a community garden where you can control the soil and you can control the irrigation. And we're not talking about doing big fields of food for human consumption, but a 2-acre organic garden is enormous and can feed a lot of people. So it can feed the people in the community, but it can go beyond that. The produce can go to the farmer's market, it can go to local area restaurants or clubs. But everybody has equal use of the riding trails, the walking trails. Everybody has equal share to be able to come to the community garden. And like I said, you can get involved. You can pick up the tomatoes in season or not pick them up. You could choose to have somebody bring them to you, I suppose.
Again, I'm focused on how it's going to work in terms of the legal aspects of this.
Homeowners Association.
It's not a co-op?
It's a homeowners association that when you build a private road, you build a private community like this with a handful of homes, you would have a private road maintenance agreement that would typically deal with the snow plowing, the maintenance of the private road and the drainage easements along the side of it, utilities as well. But in this case, the farm management team. And we think at build out, the farm will take care of itself. The idea of a regenerative farm is to literally not have to buy any inputs. You're growing all your inputs. You're growing food for the animals that ultimately create compost that become the fertilizer for what they're eating and for ultimately what goes into the gardens and what small amount of acreage is applied.
And each deed will have restrictions so that this operates this way in perpetuity?
Perpetuity, you know, like we put things into farmland preservation where we have a 2-acre farm residential exception. In this case, we're talking about less than that. We're talking about 1.5 acres. We're having a similar concept of easements on the farmland, and obviously easements over the environmental areas. Like I said,
Jim, would you like me to speak a little bit to the farm structure?
Wait. It's Larry Jacobs. I just want to get back to one of Rich's points. So Rich, the issue you're talking about, can you mandate that the farming will continue? That has not been presented to us.
No, absolutely, you can mandate that. I mean, the idea is...
Well, as what's been offered to us is conservation area, and what's been offered to us is a restriction with that 1.5 acre exception. What Rich was asking about, can you make sure that this is farmed in perpetuity? And that's something that would be enforceable by the municipality. And no, we can't come in and
how can you do that?
There will be restrictive and protective covenants that before anybody buys anything, they're buying into the concept of this. Just like if you bought any other property around the world where you might have a resort scenario or something where there's this particular resource that needs to be, I don't know what happened, that needs to be preserved and constrained. Why am I hearing myself? 1 second, I don't know. Someone else here?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So yes, the idea and is to create these protective and restrictive covenants, deed restrictions, if you will. We've done this. I've done this many times. In fact, anything that I've done in my life has usually had the name farm after it, and it's usually had something to do with protective and restrictive covenants. This, to my way of thinking, is the best. And it's certainly something of the time, right? So yes, the idea is that this will be within the deed, that this is how it has to be maintained. And, you know, these protective and restrictive covenants, along with the easements, are very powerful, you know, legal tools. And we don't see that there's any problem with that any more than, you know, any other project that would have, you know, a similar requirement.
Jim, can I ask you, this is Carol. So it's not the homeowner that's actually going to be doing the farming.
No.
It's going to be a crew of farmers, we'll call them for lack of another term. And where are these farmers? You're saying, I mean, do they stay on the property? How does that work? I mean,
They do not live on the property.
but where's the equipment and stuff that you're talking about?
We will have our own equipment barns. There are existing barns on the property that we are looking to restore and maintain, utilize for the purposes. One of those barns, if you look at, Ron wants to point to it, maybe if we go back to the rendered site plan, you'll see where the community garden is. You want to go to the rendered colored one, but where Ron's cursor is, there's an existing barn, and that in front of that, if you go to the rendered plan, you'll see an annotation for community garden. So community gardens is sort of a patchwork quilt. The reason is that you're not going to build everything out day one. The community is going to be building over a period of time, so you have the ability to kind of grow the patchwork quilt of meadow and garden in front of existing community barn, which was a horse barn at one time. It's been dilapidated. It's been left to kind of rot. We've been sort of propping it up and doing, you know, those rot repair and all the things we need to kind of make that barn usable again. There's equipment barns on the property. We'll probably need other equipment barns, which will be agricultural in nature. And we'll try to keep those we will keep those out of the residential / farmhouse exception areas. So where we need an equipment barn, and we won't need more than one. The other thing is when you have grains and you have hay and you're doing 1 or 2 cuttings a year and you're doing that seasonally, it's okay to still have a legacy farmer that might have been farming property next door or might have farmed this at one point that we've already communicated with and have him farming this year for us. So we're putting this back into farm this year and last year, depending on which property we're talking about. In some cases, 4 years we've been doing it now. So it's not unheard of to still bring the farmer that might be up on Larger Cross Road to bring his equipment down for the hay process. But for the general maintenance of the community garden area, we're going to have on-site staff for that. It's not an enormous undertaking, and done right and properly, organic care and regenerative care is a lot easier. We don't have to buy a lot of inputs. At the end of the day, we're growing all our inputs, so it's a closed loop. And it's not that difficult. Realize that small family farms make up 88% of all the farms in the country. In New Jersey, that number is 95%.
All right, Tim Walter here. I have a question for you. Earlier you said that all these homeowners will have an opportunity to participate. So it's not mandatory participation, is it?
No, they have an opportunity to get involved in doing their own hobby farming or getting involved with, let's say, as on the homeowners association, talking about what might grow in that field next year. But as far as being involved in the actual harvesting or planting or operation of the farm, they have no obligation. They have an opportunity to have a chat.
How about financial though? Financially, I'm talking. Are they
no,
financial opportunity, or they are signing a contract saying they are going to be spending X amount per month to support this whole thing?
Yes, no different than if they went individually and everybody bought 10 to 15 acre lots. They'd all have to hire a landscaper. Arguably in Bedminster, they probably have 10 acre lots. They'd want to achieve some sort of farm assessment, right? So they'd have a hay farmer, some legacy farmer, and maybe 3 guys might have the same hay farmer, and the 5 guys might not have the same hay farmer, and 1 guy might be breeding horses, right? So they may try to do that, and they'll each have their own landscaper pulling up a trail.
But they may, I'm hearing a lot of, you think, they wish, we may.
Yeah, but we don't know, but that's okay. In this case, we know what we're doing. So
I know, but you're asking for 2 extra building lots based on an executed plan that may, or you wish, or possibly may have.
No, what I'm saying, I'm talking about what people may do if it wasn't for this. I'm not talking about what they may do now. I'm saying if they did this somewhere else, Tim, they may do these things, but not in the case of Bedminster Farms. What we're doing is supplying a farm management team. That's the critical difference, is that we are managing this for them. They don't have an option to hire a farmer. They don't have an option to go out and hire a landscaper. The farm management team is the landscape team. Our landscape is the farm being done to what's being done all at the same time, moving the sheep from this pasture to that pasture, planting this pasture or this field out, leaving this on a cover crop for the winter wheat, doing different things. That's our obligation, and they're going to sign on that this is what they know. They're coming into an agrihood. It's not uncommon to have agrihoods. People are mowing down golf courses around the country to do this. So this is not a new concept. The idea of regenerative agriculture is what agriculture was before World War II ended.
I get you. I think the whole idea is great. It's just execution, which is everything. I'm a business owner myself. I have a lot of great ideas, but they don't always come to fruition. Real quickly though, that existing home is still going to stay there. So we're looking at 9 new homes and the existing one that's already there. So it's 10 total.
No, 9.
Tim,
so that one is going to go.
Tim, there's actually 2 existing homes. There's actually 2 existing homes where we stand and 7 new lots. And one of those 7 has already been approved.
Okay.
And so we really have 6 new lots. The one existing home is getting torn down, which complies with zoning, but we agreed to move twice the distance back for a front yard setback from going from 200 on Lamington Road to 400, and regrading that property so it's a pasture. You won't see the new home because it'll be back by the pond. Obviously, the right distance from the pond, not encroaching the pond. It's still 500 feet from the pond.
So there will be 9. If we approve everything you want, there will be a maximum of 9 total homes on these 3 lots.
Correct. There'll be 9 where 2 exist, 7 new.
7.
114 acres.
Okay, and the 2. Okay.
1 being torn down and removed and replaced, and the existing one. And oh, by the way, the 2 places that we don't have that lot circle thing that we got a relief from, we did need a variance for that. The last application, we got that at that time on lot 15. and the one on lot 21, there's an existing house there. And the driveway that comes to even to the garage of that existing house comes down and creates a scenario with the property line of the next door neighbor that right now that house exists. So you couldn't put a 500-foot circle on that if you tried.
Okay, I got
Nor
it.
could you 100 years ago when the house was built. And I don't think it's worthy of, chopping it down. It's a beautiful home.
I just want to, Ron already covered that issue. So Jim, I would say, leave that issue to Ron.
That's fine.
You mentioned, so once again, we come back to what is being proposed and what the benefit of coming in. And I really like the way that Rich Travellini described it as sort of like a farm club, right? You're buying into a farm club, you're instead of a golf club, a house on a golf club, you're getting a house on a farm. And that there are something akin to dues. And and you mentioned that they would be paying to support the farming activity. Do you have details on what that payment structure, how that's going to be put together?
Do you want me to speak to that?
There are drafts of homeowners agreements that we have worked through that come from also past projects of ours. We've had, extraordinary amenities like a farm. So yeah, and here's the good news, right? If you wanted to live there, realize that shared services, communities and counties are looking at shared services all the time as a way of reducing cost. At the end of the day, the landscaper farm management team is doing all this, and you're dividing the cost of that by 10. Now it's obviously it's 10 times bigger or 9 times bigger than what your property is, but we think that the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. You're going to be paying less as opposed to what you would pay to have your farmer there and to have your landscaper there. So we think there's a benefit to the homeowner. So whatever their fee is going to be on a monthly basis, it's going to be far less than what they're paying now when they come out of, as an empty nester, come out of a larger home, in Far Hills or Mendham or Bernardsville or Bedminster. And we've had those conversations, and we have experience with, homeowners associations where we have to charge the correct fee for what I'll call an exclusive neighborhood.
So, but going into the calculation of the dues,
yes,
is hiring the farming crew.
Yep.
Purchasing the equipment.
No.
Where's the equipment coming from?
It's coming from our cost up front. So the initial setup of the farm, if you look at the document I sent, we talked about the fact that, if I were to call myself a developer, and let's call myself a developer for the lack of a better term, because I don't like the term. But if you had, somebody here from a company that you would construe as a development company, and they would be talking about the amenities that they would building and the cost of building the clubhouse and the pool and things like that. In my case, we're building a farm. And so there's cost of building the farm correctly, but you can't just build it overnight. You don't snap your fingers. You have to kind of build it over time. So our cost to invest in the land, to invest in the correct structure for the farm, bringing in the animals, the correct outbuildings for the animals, the correct pastures, the correct pasture mix, the soil test, all these things, building this farm, Larry, is on us as the developer going in, and then buying the equipment and hiring that staff to kind of get that going before a house is even here. We've been at this 4 years now, starting as a farmer to create a farm. We're going to be here for a really long time, continuing to do that. The private road is actually going to help because it's going to become a farm road. We're going to have far less damage on this property once we have that farm road to actually access the fields. The way it was accessed before is that they would drive tractors down into the brook and through the brook and up the other side.
I just want to come back to the money and how the farm operation is going to work and how it's going to be paid for. So,
the homeowners association will pay the money.
Equipment.
Can I speak to that, Jim? Can I speak to that? It might be helpful just having done so many of these. Would that be?
Farmer D needs to be sworn in.
Stay off it for a minute, please. Here's the reality. There is going to be a homeowners association that take care of everything from the road maintenance to the farm maintenance, and that's going to be a monthly fee. But the setup of the farm, the setup of the common area buildings like the barns that we need, the equipment that we need for the barns, that's all part of our costs. That's all part of our investment.
But that's an initial one-time,
Right.
that's your
And
setup cost.
right.
But
And
as,
obviously built into the homeowners, we have to have an ongoing replacement fee as would be in any other homeowners thing. So yes, that'll be part of the calculation, and that homeowners association agreement, if the town would like it to be, could be part of, documents that might be in the resolution or something where you can see that. We don't have a final draft of that, but we're, clearly working on it.
yeah,
And
I'm not looking to see your draft of your documents. We just want to know how it's being structured, because, what we do have on our board is we have folks who are very familiar with HOA and dues. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think we have 3 condo presidents on our board. If you're a condo president or have been,
Yeah.
raise your hand and duck, because you
Right.
probably have a whole bunch.
Yeah.
So our board is very familiar with, assessments and special assessments and more special assessments.
Hey, Larry and Jim, it's Jeff. And along Larry's point, I guess my question to you all is, because you are actually, from what I understand, are setting this up as a homeowners association, but as a farm homeowners association, unlike where we all are. My question to you is, because you're setting up that those common areas on that one piece of lot 21 there. So you guys are basically not going to continue to run this farm as the management agent for this association for the foreseeable future. I guess my question is, though, is you're going to be doing all of your common gathering on that one piece of property, where the barn and the community barn is, and even though there's going to be a homeowner living on that site, and you guys won't have any ownership technically of any of the properties. The ownership is happening with these 9 homes. Is that my understanding?
Without us forming a common lot, for example. And we think the elements of enjoyment and easement for everybody exist throughout the property. So whether it's in the woodland area to the west or to the northeast, woodland areas and the stream corridors, no different than the community gardens. And the community garden area is probably, not counting the field behind it, it's a few acres. Let's call it 3 acres. And yeah, we intend, while close to the existing farmhouse, but it has that, if you look at the existing farmhouse and you were to go there, you would go, wow, I get it. Like, maybe for me, it would be the most beautiful place to be, because you get to look over the garden. Now, it's not going to be for everybody. Some people, the next house is a half mile away down the road. Right. We're building a half mile extension to a half mile. We're building a half mile extension to this road, barely. But the next home site is a half mile away. And each of these homes are 1/10 of an acre from each other, and only 2 homes see another home. So they're very sporadic, but yes, that is the community center. And unfortunately, it's not going to be, there's only, like you said, 1 house goes out to Lamington Road. So of the 9, 1 is not on the private road at all. It has its own driveway to Lamington. So
right. With that said, I mean, there's going to be activity, common activity going on all 9 of these properties. But in order to get to that last one, you're going to have to go out onto Lamington Road to get to it.
Well, the common activity on Lamington for us, there is actually a crossing right now that's used for farm purposes.
Right. Okay. That's bridge. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We don't know what will happen. We may want to get a permit to make that bridge nicer. We wouldn't even call it a bridge. It's a reinforced piece of concrete that's been laying over the brook for a hoopstick brook for a long time, so that people could get over that brook. We're using that as partial farm access. There's also a horse trail that comes up over there. So, we can still use that and come in the back way. It's not a problem.
Okay. Thank you.
Jim, Colin here. What's your strategy for ramping up? I mean, you're not going to flash cut all these homes and lots at the same time, and you obviously have a significant carry expense with respect to the farming activities. So how do you manage that from an economic standpoint and from a build standpoint?
I'm going to answer that, but before that, I'm going to just let you know my battery's running low, and apparently it doesn't want to charge, so I may jump over to, maybe Ron has an Apple charger for me. Give me 1 second. Yes, he does. I think so. I think we're good. All right. Apologize. So the ramp up on this, everything is custom designed, build to suit by us. There's no imported contractors coming in. I have a company of 40 years with staff that designs and builds. We have local area architects and local area landscape architects, and obviously we have one of my favorite guys in the world at Gladstone Design doing all the site engineering. So we're not having catch as catch can. The restrictions on coming here are that in order to be done right, it has to be done right, and the growth of this is very slow. We may sell lots early on. We have a lot of interest from local area people, almost all local area people. And the reality is it's going to take about 2 years to 3 years to design and build one home, and it may take longer. So the build out happens over time, and we're okay with that. The reality is the farm's going to take a long time to build out too. So we're comfortable with the fact that this is a slow growth area. This is not about banging things out. There's no models. It's not pre-designed. Every homeowner will go through the design process of figuring out their program, what's important to them. We're going to stress the net zero design, stress building these homes with what we call the well building standard, which we're the first homeowners and home builders in New Jersey to be part of the well building standard, which is what homes are for people rather than, let's say, what LEEDs is for buildings. It really applies more to residential, sustainable, passively built homes. So that we have a lot of goals in terms of how we design these homes, both from functional standpoint, being environmentally net positive, approaching net zero, but also being lovely architecture that is, reminiscent of classic architecture from Somerset County and Bedminster itself, and farmhouse architecture that's more regional and whatnot. So shingle style barn type structures are very, very typical of this kind of area. But since we're the one architect, we're the one designer along with Ron, and so we have an idea where certain homes are going to look like they were always there, that they're barns. They all should look like they're there. We're following the tractor roads. We place these homes not to get maximum density. Like I said, the first home we decided should go a half a mile from the second home. So it's really just about how to place those homes on the farmland correctly and grow it in together. So I see that the last home may not be built for 10 years here.
So that goes back to my question. You have a long ramp. How do you deal with the economics? Because you have a lot of upfront expenses as well as ongoing expenses to run this farm, set it up. How are you distributing those costs against the buyers?
Again, regenerative agriculture is self-sustaining, and it does take time to ramp up, but there's a considerable cost to that. And it's not a considerable, but sometimes it's just knowledge, right? So, you learn what the property needs, you take the time to kind of, figure out what the solution to the problem is. And sometimes just more thought, gets it as cheap as if you threw dollars at it. It's really about being crafty, but also throwing a lot of money at it. And if you say, well, what do you need to have a successful agrihood here in Bedminster? This would be it.
Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when you create this, and if you're, what I'm taking away from the dialogue here is that, number one, we want to understand that there's deed restrictions or some assurances that it will always be run as a farm. Individual owners can't decide that they want to do something different with their parcel. This is a club, this is a homeowners association, whatever you want to call it, to be run as a farm. So the deed restrictions protect it from being used for some other purpose. The other question that I think Larry was starting to ask and others are kind of contributing to is that how, through good times and in bad, how do the owners assure, how can you assure us that the owners, through some kind of economic hardship, some kind of pandemic, et cetera, are still going to be able to afford to run this farm the way you are envisioning it for us? Because when money gets tight and, are people going to be forced to sell because they can't continue to pay the dues that you're asking? Do you set it up with some reserves, some sort of endowment, if, for lack of a better description, that will, you know, securitize the operation of this farm for some period of time? I think that's the concern. I think we understand your vision at this point, and all the, you know, the aspirations seem admirable. You know, we'll get over lot circles and some of the details that, you know, Ron is trying to get us through. But, you know, we're buying this vision, or we're buying into this vision. And we just want to make sure that 5 years, 10 years down the line, this well-cultivated farm with high yields and great production doesn't become, you know, a wood in a meadow that's just neglected, like, you know, so many other pieces of farmland in the township.
I'm sorry, Rich, just to piggyback on that, this is Scott Zupnick. You know, a number of us live in the hills and Presidents and whatnot. Most of these neighborhoods or homeowners associations have documents that govern how an association runs and how the money has to be managed with regard to operating funds and things like that. Will there be some sort of document governing this entire development?
Yes, absolutely. I'll handle that. And also, just to get back to the mayor's point earlier, when the board's taking a look at this and saying, how are we going to ensure that this happens? You know, they could get 7 lots. They're asking for 9 lots. What is the town of Bedminster getting out of that? Well, the fact of the matter is, once you record these deed restrictions on all of these lots, that's for the benefit of the public. So people are not going to be able to come back in 15 years from now and ask this board for relief, because the only way to release that deed restriction is through public hearings. It's a very onerous process, so they're not going to be able to do it. So as far as everything goes bad, everything absolutely goes bad, the town still has these deed restrictions that say that nothing else can be built on that lot outside of that 1.5 acres. So if it's a 13-acre lot, I mean, you do the math. So you will always have that deed restriction. It's for the benefit of the public, and you can't come in and ask a board for a variance. That is for the benefit of the public. The only way to get that released is through a series of public hearings. So if nothing else, you're going to have the restrictions on all of those lots, much like a conservation or an agricultural easement, however the board wants us to set that up, and that's going to be the protection for the town.
Michael, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to have a question. Is the whole property farmland assessed?
Is the whole property?
How is that going to work with the farmland assessment?
Well, I think they're going to.
So if I can I answer that? Jim Downs again, if you can see me here. Hold on 1 second. So we've been in the process of taking that which is not farmland assessed and generating new farmland. This year we just received all our paperwork and we have everything filed. We have a new FSN from the Farm Service Administration agency rather. We have documents ready to go to the town on that. So where there was existing agriculture, we've mirrored over it, and while we're improving it and increasing areas there that exist. Where agriculture did not exist, we have new agricultural areas that will be, for the first time this year, this August, paperwork filed for that. And we'll be continuing putting about 50 acres of farmland, of woodland management into the preserved woodland areas. And, you know, our idea is to practice silvopasture with regard to the areas where pastures come up against woodlands, and really do, you know, the appropriate woodland management, which is, you know, under the Department of Agriculture, still agriculture. But to right now, 50 acres of this 114 acres is not in agriculture at all. That is in woodland. And then there's another 30 acres or so that's also not in agriculture that we're putting in. So we're putting about 70 new acres of agriculture in starting this year, and following up with the
is it divided up between the 9 lots, or how does that work?
Jim, did we lose you?
Oh, did you?
I'm sorry. No, I was just asking, is it divided up between the different lots, 5 here, 10 here, with this
Well,
lot?
right now, but until we came here tonight, we have 3 lots, 2 of which had no agriculture on it, 1 did. Now we have 3 lots that we own. We'll all have agricultural aspects and filings this year.
I mean, the reason I ask is because if something is
So
farm
right now it's 3
related-
lots, but ultimately it's going to be every lot will have agriculture on it, and there will be 9 tax filings. And whatever agriculture exists on those lots will exist, and will follow the process of any homeowner, any
Right.
landowner.
The reason I ask is that because if someone has a farm assessed lot and they're farming and they want to do something on that lot pertaining to farming, they can do it.
Not
Whether
if they're not
you
if
have a
not if they're deed restricted from.
Well, I don't know if
buying
that's
into the idea of a
Jim,
homeowners
Jim,
association.
Excuse me.
I can't hear you.
Excuse me. I don't know if that's true. And it seems like a lot of what you're presenting here is like, well, I'm going to come up with this plan. I'm going to come up with this. We're going to do this. And I think as a board, well, me personally, I don't want to speak for the board, but I mean, a lot of the things you're talking about, if in fact they come to fruition, I mean, it sounds okay, but some of the documents that you're talking about creating, it would be helpful to have these things to look at so they can help us make a decision on such an impactful application where you're asking us to really deviate from our 10-acre zoning. And I just think there's a lot of stuff. It's hard for me to really, get my head around everything. A lot of, and I understand it's a work in progress. I get that, so, yeah.
Could I ask, I'd like to ask too about this association. Now, do you plan on having sort of 2 associations, one for the amenities and then one for the farm? And my other question is, does it then become self-governing where you're not involved anymore and the homeowners become self-governing within themselves?
Let me answer part 1. Part 1 is that there's 1 association.
Okay, so that you have to participate in both the amenities and the farm.
Well, the farm is the amenity. We construe the farm as the amenity.
Well,
We're not
no,
putting-
because you
we're
have
not putting
roads and
$10
other
off.
things. You have roads and snow and other things that you have to have
So
as amenities.
certainly, yes. Yes. So the farm with its farm road / private road, the farm road is one and the same as the private road, if you will. So I apologize. I'm calling it all sort of part of the farm. For me, it is a farm. But yes, there's 1 association, and all the dues will roll up to all the maintenance that's required. In an area where we weren't farming this, and there was no produce, if you will, from the farm, whether it's hay for animals or whether it's vegetables in a garden, somewhere there'd be a landscaping budget, for a common area where you lived on an island or you lived in a neighborhood that had those kind of restrictive covenants. And I've built several, small little neighborhood, private road scenarios where this has been at play, and I've been doing this for 42 years. And this would be the best example of an agricultural environmental neighborhood, however, because we're putting far more restrictions on it in this case. So I think one of the questions that George said is like, well, maybe this and maybe that. Realize that the first thing that comes is getting the site plan approved and then being able to put it into play. But for 4 years, we have been farming things that weren't farmed before. We have been cleaning up environmental issues that were not cleaned up before. So we're not just thinking we're going to do it. We have been doing it. We have become farmers here on this property, and we're making up for a lot of years of kind of mismanagement on the property. So we're not thinking about starting. We have started, and we're in that process. As far as the covenants and protective covenants, I have stuff in my files going back that don't change that much, going back 20 and 25 years, that deal with private road maintenance, landscaping, farm, agriculture, other things like that. So it's not documents we have to necessarily remake, but we're going to remake them and started remaking them. We have a very nice draft for 2020, but it wouldn't typically be something I would bring at this point to the board, but we would absolutely bring it as part of an agreement with the town and a resolution. And those documents we would be viewed by people that care about these things, because we are looking for this to be truly sustainable. We're not, our whole premise is that it's sustainable agriculture and sustainable environmental protection. So that's our premise. We would be really remiss if our documents or something legally was not in fact sustainable. And to leave it as somebody would go out and build a subdivision and just sell homes and leave it up to the idea that everybody on their own is just going to be fantastic at it. I think it's a far better idea that people sign on to the fact that opportunity without obligation to actually get your hands dirty, but go to a place they know that's going to have the managed care. That's a weird
All
term.
right, again, Jim, I'm asking the question. I don't know if I got an answer to it. You know, if I was setting up an office park with 4 or 5 disparate owners and we had this common area maintenance agreement or this association, so to speak, you know, we'd come up with an operating budget, but we might also establish reserves.
Yes.
In terms of structuring this thing financially, are there initially going to be reserves or some sort of fund created to account for the blight that you have to deal with in one area of woodlands, or you're digging a foundation for one of the houses and you find that there's underground storage tanks there. Again, or at least my concern, I won't say we as well. My concern is that you're protecting it from other uses. I want to know if you're going to be able to maintain this high level of cultivation of the farmland, this high level of manicured and properties, you know, throughout the cycles in the economy. So are reserves there be minimum reserves that you always maintain, these kinds of things? How is it structured financially to protect the operation?
Yes, there will be reserves.
To piggyback on that too, I wanted to know if the homeowners are going to be, you know, self-governing themselves like an association. After you got so many houses sold, you know, it usually goes into the association and they self-govern themselves. So is that what happens here? And then what happens to the farm?
So there's protections for us that can be placed within the organizations of a homeowners associations. There's lots of ways to make sure that you don't lose 100% control. But ultimately, years down the road, a homeowners association, and arguably where someone is passionately involved in something, that you would think that the people that ultimately get voted to participate in this, no different than the board members here, have, you know, a real care and concern for their community, and not the opposite. So that's A. B, there is protections for having the developer that started the idea, the farmer that started this, you know, to have protections in there. And our documents do and will. And yes, we will have minimal reserves. The other thing is, we're not talking about a community where this is on the poverty line. You know, a lot of board members have mentioned, well, is this going to be where, you know, are we going to build homes the style which they're accustomed? You know, people would be spending a lot of money to design and build their own homes and their own infrastructure. Storage tanks that are found on their property are in fact part of the execution of a lot development plan and the construction on that home that's clearly funded not by a common area element. Those would be funded directly by, and then ultimately maybe insured by, anything that would happen within the confines of a lot, other than the agriculture itself, right? So we're placing the agriculture there. And yes, there'll be reserves. There'll be minimum reserves, but we're not talking about people who are living on the poverty line here, and we're going to be giving them economy of scale for their property management and maintenance, plus giving them, you know, healthy property to live on. So I feel that the people that want to live like this is not 1975 or 95 or even 2005. We understand that, you know, we've kind of screwed the environment a bit, guys. And this is where a lot of people would like to be. So I don't see this being an issue. Again, if you don't want to live in an agri-hood in Bedminster where we think about environment and agriculture first, you're not going to sign a set of deed restrictions like this to live there. But if you care about those things, you will. And, you know, we need a couple other bodies. And my intention is to live there, and as long as I am living, and be one of those homeowners, and be be the lead farmer for as long as I'm here. But I think we have captured the imagination of families and people that have seen these kinds of things happening around the country. Even just the resurgence of, the farmers market in Bedminster itself. It's captured a lot of people. People have become farmers that weren't farmers, hobby farmers, if nothing else. But let's get to the legal question, because I'd like my attorney to sort of answer anything that you might feel you need better on the docks and how that's going to protect both us, the farm, and the community.
And we could certainly get those to the board to review. We have those, right, Jim?
Yes.
So we could get those to the board to make sure that you're comfortable with them. But again, just to go back to what Ron had testified to earlier, the thing that the town gets, like I said, and I know this, we've thrown a lot at you the last 2 meetings, but even if everything were to go totally bad, the town would always have the deed restrictions on each of those lots. And again, it's not something that somebody could just have cast aside by going in front of a board. It would be something that would have to be removed after a series of public hearings. So I think that's really, I know that there's concerns out there that if everything went bad, what is Bedminster going to have at the end of this? And, those deed restrictions have value.
And so, but Michael, just to be clear, the deed restrictions that Ron was talking about
I just want to add
conservation areas.
Could I add? Oh, I'm sorry. Someone else speak.
I'm sorry, Mary, I missed that.
Okay, so but the deed restrictions the nature of the deed restrictions that Ron was discussing and you were alluding to, those are, and let's boil it down. Those are conservation restrictions. They may be in the form of, they may mention farmland, but in the end, it's really conservation. So that, and Jim, I love your enthusiasm, and I support the concept of the agriculture, but at the same time, on behalf of Bedminster, we have to look at this not just in a 1 year, 2 year, 5 year program, but in a longer program. And as Carol said, if this gets handed over to an HOA and is self-governing, and they go, holy cow, the price of a plow is really expensive, and we need to do this, and the barn needs this, and the irrigation system is falling apart. Oh my God, and our farmer just left. We have to hire a new farmer and new laborers. Man, this whole thing is getting really expensive. Let's scale it back. And we've got to be prepared. And we have to look at this from that perspective. And so back to what Ron and Michael were saying, if we're looking at this as a 9-lot subdivision, what are we getting out from the 9-lot subdivision? What's being offered to the town to justify the variances? And I just want to bring it back to that. Jim, love the enthusiasm, and I love the idea of the regenerative ag use on the property. But we do have to look at it very circumspect, and we have to look at it from whether it works, and we also have to look at whether it doesn't work and what we are left with at the end. And which is why I think Michael's bringing it back to the easement, that of whether it's a 10.5 acre lot or a 15 acre lot, that only 1.5 will be used for the residential improvements, and that the remainder of the lot is either conserved or put to some agricultural use. I do look at Jim's drawing. I look at Yoga Barn, and I keep going back to whether Yoga Barn is a true agricultural use, but I think we can let that slide for a bit. And so I just want to bring it back to that perspective. So Michael, I do appreciate you bringing it back to the easement discussion. So thank you.
Sure. And like I said, as far as the other documents are concerned, we'll be happy to provide those to the board to review. But I think that really, and Ron brought this up first, was 7 lots versus 9. What you're getting with the 9 is the fact that you're going to have these deed restrictions that go into the future. They don't end. And I think there's a definite benefit to the town to having it, as opposed to a 7-lot subdivision where you could do anything on those lots within zoning.
Well, I just do want to point that out once again, that on those 9 of the 9 lots you described, at least what, 3 of them are encumbered by the RHA conservation easement, which once again, I don't know what that easement says, but I presume it's a fairly broad conservation restriction.
Well, I'm not saying that there aren't any restrictions on it. There's obviously constraints on these lots, but we're certainly going to give you more than you have now. Even on the ones that are constrained, the acre and a half is still, we're going to have more restraints on those that exist today. Ron.
Yeah, I can add a little to this. Just that, Larry, you asked me a question before I didn't have the answer for, but the existing farm fields that are on the property now, it's about 40 to 45 acres that are there right now, that are today. So, you know, throwing out any of the issues of the woodland that's in the Irwa easement, you got about 45 acres, and we're talking about disturbing a max of 15 acres. And that's not all farm fields. Some of that's some wooded areas now for the road. So in essence, the restriction itself would be approximately 30 acres of land that of fields that are unencumbered by an Irwa easement, that are unencumbered by environmental constraints, that would be preserved in this concept. And then you have wooded areas that are not in environmental constraints, not in an Irwa easement, that would also be preserved. And that's probably another 10, maybe 12 acres land of that. So you have additional benefits that are beyond just the Irwa easement or the constraints. We're not double dipping, as someone said in the meeting.
That was me.
On that, is that there's real.
That was me, Ron. So the double dipping
that's up on our screen now is, you know, field 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are preserved fields that would be there, that you wouldn't typically have if everyone was independent as a 7-lot subdivision.
Okay, thank you. And you probably didn't hear me, but the double dipping line was mine. So you can direct that at me.
I think we should open it up to the public. We haven't had any comments from them. Janine, can you look and see if anybody has a question?
Good.
Yeah, Michael Slattery has his hand up.
Michael, you gotta take your.
You can unmute.
Okay.
Michael, please raise your right hand. This is Mr. Collins, the attorney. I'm have to swear you in, okay?
Sure.
Were you sworn at the last hearing?
No.
No. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. And please state your name, please state your name, spell your name, the last name, and give us your address.
Sure. Michael Slattery, Slattery, 705 Larger Crossroad.
Thank you.
So I'm in lot 20, which is just to the east of this development. And lot 19 is just to our west. And you haven't really talked about that. It's in the, I see in the picture that's up now, it's designated as Woodland Area 1. In the earlier diagrams, it wasn't even listed as part of the development. So I guess it is part of the development now. It's listed as Woodland Area 1. Is that correct? That's lot 19.
I can answer it. It's not part of the subdivision application. It is.
Okay, but in this diagram, it's designated as Woodland Area 1.
It's not part of the actual subdivision application. It's a lot that Jim has control over that he's calling woodland management. That's not being proposed to be subdivided in this plan.
So the homeowners of this development don't have any access to that lot?
I don't know that, Jim. You'd have to answer if that would be part of the.
Yes, they would have access. Yes, the intention is to have access to that woodland. area.
Okay, and so that would,
We own it as a separate lot. There's no home on it.
and
Not
it
part of
would,
the subdivision.
and my concern is that,
You know, adjacent woodland.
sure, and my concern is that the neighbor is that it stays that way, right? That's the plan, that you wouldn't develop that lot at all?
Yeah, the idea is to keep that lot as it is and not make it part of any subdivision.
Okay.
But Jim,
That's
would it be restricted from future development as a standalone lot?
No, it's a standalone lot. We haven't decided exactly what we'd have there. We've been doing environmental assessments on that. We're developing a woodland management plan on it.
You putting a house on it, or is that going to be subject to restrictions?
It's not part of this. It's not part of this application. I own it separately in a different scenario.
But
but it's in your picture though.
You show it on your plans.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just showing as a woodland area. It's not part of the subdivision, any of the engineering documents.
But your marketing is part of the development. In the last picture was part of the development.
How many acres is it?
It's 12 acres. It's 12 acres. It's not. It's there as a rendered area just to show that there's woodland there. I do own the lot, so it was on the paper, but it's not on any of Ron's engineering documents for any purposes. It has frontage on Lamington Road. It's a legal lot. It does not.
But when you market the development, it appears that it's in the marketing materials.
I don't have any marketing materials.
Well, that last picture we just saw.
Okay, it's just a rendering of the ag, and the person rendering it just took the opportunity from the aerial just to put. They knew that we owned the property. If just took the opportunity to show the woodland on it. There is no proposed development for it at this point.
But Jim,
we're not looking to subdivide the property or do anything untoward with it. It's a legal lot that we own separately that we did not. That we picked up very late in the game and did not want to do anything with at this point. It's simply a standalone lot. It's obviously adjacent to us.
Jim, you guys introduced, Jim, this was your submission.
Okay, but all I'm saying is it doesn't show lot lines there. It just does show woodland, and it says woodland area 1. It is woodland area next to development. Since we own it, it is still part of this, but it doesn't have to be part of the subdivision because it has no legal standing to be involved in the subdivision at this point. There's no reason. We're not coming to the board for doing anything, but we could say that we own the property. If I own the property behind this, maybe I might have shown that too. It's not there for any particular bad reason. It's just to show that there's woodland there, and my renderer knew that we own the property, so he rendered that in for us, and that's fine. If you guys have a problem with it, I can submit the exhibit and take it out, but we still own the property.
Then I got to question this exhibit then, because you have woodland area 1 and you've got woodland area 2.
Well, it is a woodland area.
You're providing and I think you mentioned this earlier, pushing that house 1 on whatever that lot to be created.
The woodland area 1, since we own the property and it's adjacent to the farm, in my opinion, would become part of a woodland area that was adjacent to the farm that people would have access to, without a doubt. But there's no subject land use development issues there right now because we are not proposing any. So it's not part of any of the engineering documents. It is on what you're calling my marketing piece, but it's really just an agricultural plan. And it's a concept rendering, and it does show woodland, not new woodland, that's existing woodland that exists there. And we will be putting that into ag for woodland management. I have a forester right now doing inspections there and getting ready, since we only bought that fairly recently. That's now going in to become woodland management area, and it will accrue to a common area use for anybody that thinks they want to walk in there or what have you, but it's not part of any land use issues or discussion.
So that may get a house. And this is Larry Jacobs. So this is no longer Michael talking. This is a board member talking that an exhibit was provided showing a woodland area.
Okay.
and that woodland area should be ignored for this purposes of this application.
If that's our mistake, I apologize. And
I also want to point out that it's also appears on your website. So it is really part of the marketing materials. Madam Chairman, if I could just
own the property, it's not something we brought to the board.
If I could just butt in here for 1 second.
That's Paul?
Yes, it is.
Paul, yeah.
I frankly didn't notice that application was under the control of the applicant. I think some of the variances are related to the bulk in the area and the 500-foot circle. And I think one of the general tests that is done in a variance is, does the applicant have control over any adjoining property that will reduce the magnitude of the variances? And I think clearly it is. It is, that's been discussed, it's 12 acres. Is there a way to reduce the magnitude of the variances on one of the lots by the inclusion of that or a portion of that? I think I'll defer to Tom and Frank as to whether or not that should be part of the proofs.
Mm-hmm. Tom, are you there? Tom, what happened to Tom?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I missed the question.
Missed the question.
Yeah.
Paul, you want to talk about it again?
Sure. Tom, we're talking about this woodland area 1 that is an adjoining lot that's under the control of the applicant. Generally, it's been my experience that if you're dealing with a variance application and you need relief for some of the bulk requirements, that one of the questions and tests that's often asked is, does the applicant have control over any adjoining property which could be used to reduce the magnitude of the variances? And I was wondering if that's something that needs to be dealt with in this case, because this is not part of the application right now.
It arguably does, because it is adjoining a lot, proposed lot that doesn't meet the resource constraints adjustment calculation of by 5 acres, I think. So, that along with any other reconfigurations might be considered relevant by the board in determining whether to grant relief or whether to require adjustments in acreage or deny relief. So it's that is a lot. Adjacent lot is undersized per the resource ordinance, I think.
Okay. Is there anyone else from the public that has any questions? If they could raise their hand.
Yes, I have some comments.
Who's speaking, please?
This is Paul Chrisman. I live at 545 Larger Cross Road.
Paul, please raise your right hand. Were you previously sworn?
No.
Okay, Paul, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you, and please state your, please spell your last name and go ahead.
Sure, it's Paul Chrisman, Christman.
Go ahead, Paul.
I live at 545 Larger Cross Road. The property is block 39, lot 2101. I would like to go on record that I oppose this subdivision and feel that what the developer is trying to do here is to develop every part of the property to turn it in not to a farm, but to a subdivision. This is not what the western section of Bedminster is. People move here for open space, preserved properties, and privacy. A few of the concerns that I have, lot 21-04 is very close to the existing lot 21, which has a house on it currently, the wetlands and the setbacks from my property. Also a concern is the road that is coming through lot 21 runs right up against my property line, as well as the helipad. I have a helipad on my property. And I just would have a lot of concerns about that. The privacy that all of a sudden I lose is tremendous. Many of these lots come up against wetlands where the blue herons live. The heron lives along the middle brook that runs through the property. There are a lot of variances here, and I don't see any reason why one of them should be granted. It's supposed to be a farm. It just seems like a lot of lots being forced on a property that's not equipped to support a development like this. When I look at it from the 34 years, and I've lived in our home for 34 years, Mrs. Mellick, who used to live in property 21, this was all part of the Mellick property that we purchased back in 1986. And Orrin Smith was the owner that we knew who bought it from Mrs. Mellick. They took care of that property beautifully. Then it was owned by the Vreelands. It went downhill from there. And from the time that Jim has bought it, Jim Downs, as much as he's done a lot of things with the farming part, the overall property is an eyesore. The fields are not cut. They used to be not farmland, they were mowed in lawn each week. And so when I just look at this, I think that this potential project, this road gets put in, it's going to be it's to me like a highway and a road that's going to create a lot of traffic from people, because anyone who's going to own one of those homes is going to have 3 cars. There'll be 3-car garages. And when I look at the amount of cars, farm equipment that are going to go through there, privacy just is totally gone. That's my comment.
Paul, could you just tell us where your lot is in comparison?
Sure.
I don't have your lot marked on our map, just so that the board can see.
So when you're driving in, lot 2101 is to the left of all of this. The road that's going down, this is to the left of that. And you see it on the map. It shows there's a pool that we have, there's a tennis court, a helipad, and this is right up against the helipad.
Mr. Chrisman, it's Larry Jacobs. So your property is on the plan that's up right now where it says community gardens. That would be your property?
Show it. I'm just looking at.
Can we see a map, please?
Yes.
Yeah, could we see a different map? Maybe we could see one that has
to the exhibit. Yeah, that one. I think that would help.
Yeah, the one that shows the lot numbers.
Right. Can you see that?
Yes, I can. So you're right below that.
I see. Okay.
There's a rectangle on the lot there. Yeah, that's a helipad.
And it's all open fields. It used to be beautifully maintained.
Did we lose him?
No.
Paul, now do you have access to your property through from Lamington Road to get back to your property now?
No, my only access to my property is on Larger Cross Road. So
I see.
Yes.
To the left. Okay.
To the left. Okay. Okay. All right. We thank you for your comments, unless you have anything else.
No, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask if there's anyone else from the public.
Cindy Aaron-Clue here.
Whoops, sorry.
I don't see anyone.
I see Cindy.
Yeah.
Now we don't see Cindy. Now we see Cindy.
Do you see
Cindy Aaron-Clue.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I came in a little late. I am just, I'm representing Raritan Headwaters. I just like to make a comment.
Does she need to be sworn in?
Yeah, Tom has to swear you in.
Sorry about that.
Tom?
Yes.
Did we lose Tom?
Tom, you're muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know I muted myself. So, Cindy, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And please state your name again, and please spell your last name and give us at least a business address.
Yes. Cindy Aaron-Clue, EHRENCLOU. I'm with Raritan Headwaters, located at 2121 Larger Cross Road in Bedminster.
Go right ahead, Cindy.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, the site plan includes the maps of the legally binding conservation easement held by Raritan Headwaters, representing about 29.25 acres. And I had a question based on the engineer's letter about the subdivision plans, eliminating, let's see, the easement, which is on lot 12, which is our easement, is not required to be calculated in the resource constraints calculation because it's not a conservation easement imposed by the township. As part of the conditions of a site plan and subdivision approval, the conservation easement is a private easement between the property owner and Upper Raritan Watershed Association. That's our prior name. And I don't think that's true. This easement is legally binding. It travels with a deed. It's filed with Somerset County. It's for the benefit of the public, and I just want to be sure that it is calculated and that it does appear in your site plan. Our duty is to just protect the conservation values. I had a nice meeting with Mr. Downs, and he assures me that it will be protected, but I just, in your review of these plans, I think that it ought to be present on the site plan. Those 29.25 acres. That's all I have to say.
Cindy, this is Paul Farrell. Let me just maybe clarify something.
Yeah.
The conservation easement is shown on all the plans. There's nothing that would change that. The comment relates to an ordinance requirement and its resource and the township's resource constraints standards.
Okay.
Under those standards, the land is not subtracted out of the overall lot area because it was not part of a subdivision or a site plan, but it is still there.
No, thank you for that clarification. I just really want to protect that 29.25 acres because it's really important forest, and I was assured by Mr. Downs it will be, but I'm here to say take care of it.
Cindy, it's Mayor Jacobs.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us. So on one of, and Jim, this goes back to your rendering to showing woodland area 2. And you've got marked out equestrian trails. You know, we have not seen the RHA easement, and I'm not sure if it goes into the nature of what is permitted and what is restricted. And Cindy, I'm not sure if you have those details.
Yeah, I mean, there are restrictions. I don't have the easement in front of me, and I'm sorry I've even arrived so late here. I have, they're open to the public. I'd be happy to share it with you, Larry, and anyone else on the committee. The restrictions are the usual business of how the landscape is managed, and you know, woodland management. Obviously, no development. There are no limits to subdivision, which is not typical of our conservation easements. But there's a very thoughtful list of how the land should be stewarded and restrictions on what can and cannot be done. And unfortunately, I don't have that easement in front of me this evening. Okay, but it's something that is attached to the deed.
So from our perspective, I'm just trying to figure out whether or not, you know, Jim has identified this as a woodland area, which in my mind means it's going to be managed as such. But on then another rendering, it shows some equestrian trails going through there. And is that consistent or inconsistent with the RHA easement?
It depends on how, there's certainly a limit on structures, and it depends on how those trails are developed. And again, I don't have the easement language in front of me, and I will, I'll look into those details and get back to you.
If I may, Larry, we're not attempting to show any new equestrian trails. The equestrian trails are there that exist. And Cindy's correct, we did have a great meeting. We do show on our plans always that easement. We assured them that that easement, that we're going to be, layering over that easement, our additional easement and restrictions on an already restricted area. So we're happy to be partners with, or I call it IRWA. We walked the entire property with 2 staff members and Cindy initially. So yes, there's no structures to be built there. It says equestrian activities without limitation is within the easement language. But we're only showing the equestrian trails because they exist. They may not be in great shape right now. There's a lot of fallen trees and different things, and we walk through that. But for the most part, they've always been there. I've been on there horseback before I was ever there on foot.
No, I appreciate that, but thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Well done, thank you.
Anyone else from the public? Just raise your hand if you have a question
Or comment.
or comment. Janine, do you see anyone else?
No, just Paul's iPad still has his hand raised, but besides that, no, I don't see anyone.
No? So we can
No.
close it to the public now. Okay. Any more comments from the board? No?
Well, I have a question for Frank, Carol.
Yes.
Frank, in reviewing your letter, if I can pull it up here for a second.
I don't see you, Rich. Where'd you go? Where did you go?
I'm looking at some other stuff here. But Frank, you there?
I'm here, Rich.
Okay, so what seems to be the most problematic is lot 21 with respect to the relief they're looking for.
Right.
And just the way that particular lot being so narrow is gerrymandered to try to come even close to conforming with at least a 10-acre minimum. But all of the issues, well, the lot coverage issue is lot 21. The setback issues, and I'm reminded of it by Mr. Chrisman's remarks here. So the setback issues and the privacy issues for not only Mr. Chrisman as the adjacent, with the adjacent property, but even those properties to one another is really kind of stretching it. So I don't know that they've addressed that in any way. It is what it is, and your language in your letter is a little bit confused. Remaining lot 21 proposes 12.8% of lot coverage where only 5% is permitted. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. Would require that, yes.
Okay, so the relief is required there because they're looking to, for 12% lot coverage as opposed to the 5% permitted.
Rich, let me say this, considering the irregular nature of the parcels that have been cobbled together to create this development, and I don't say that I don't mean that to be a negative thing. I mean, we're living with the limitations that come with each of these lots as they get combined together. And so I think the board's challenge is not so much can any one of these individual variances be justified, but are the benefits that come out of this overall proposal sufficient to overcome your concerns about those variances? Because I think if we just try to talk about the details of any particulars, it misses the big picture. And I do think that, I admire the fact that Jim has gone to such great lengths to believe in and advance this proposal. And I also respect the fact that the board members want to know, show me the money. How do I guarantee that this really happens the way you're saying? So those are all important things. But this is a very unique proposal. And I think that the board's job here really is to look at the package and decide if this is a package that warrants some additional development for the benefit of the restrictions that proposedly are advancing our master plan objectives for farmland preservation. I think that's kind of the overwhelming thing we have to do here.
I get you, Frank, but I'm still getting brain damage over lot 21.
Well, I understand the limitations.
Like we're shoehorning these two properties in there, irrespective of any of the other guidance that we try to provide in any site planning discipline here. And knowing now that he actually controls 19, I think some of my brain damage over 21 could be addressed by incorporating 19 into the application.
Yeah.
Lot averaging can do it.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
that's a good point for us to request a continuance so that we can address that additional lot, as well as some of the other issues that have come up with regard to the homeowners association documents and how we're going to control it.
Yes, also your lot line here for 21, I think needs to be addressed too. If that orange lot is the lot line, it needs to be improved there.
Okay.
As one of the things that need to be.
Can I ask a question?
Who's this? I'm sorry.
Can I ask a question?
Who is this?
It's Lou.
Lou?
Oh, Lou. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lou.
Okay, so considering we're probably going to look at a continuance, are we allowed to make suggestions as a board member?
Oh, absolutely. Sure. If you have suggestions, absolutely.
I was taken back by Mr. Christman's concerns about privacy and how much that road will be used for the entire development.
Right.
Is it possible, and this is a question for Ron and maybe Jim, to move that road over away from the property line, away from Mr. Christman's home, another 30 or 40 feet so that we can create a buffer, and then combine those two lots, 21 and 21A or whatever they are, into one? Just
Well, that
a
was my
suggestion
suggestion.
to accommodate the neighbor.
Yeah, that was sort of my suggestion too, that maybe that road should be moved over. I agree. And that would accommodate this lot, and also it would move the road in more so that it would be away from that property owner. Yeah, I think that needs to be looked at too.
Agreed.
It's Larry. I just want to come back to something that Frank was saying, and Frank, I agree with a good chunk of what you were saying, but also come back to the 500-foot radius and some of the intent of keeping the large Bedminster properties as large Bedminster properties. And even though we have 9 lots that are 10 acres, some of the geometry is a little tortured. And looking at lot 21 and the house that is proposed on, I forget what as Lou was saying, I'm not sure if it's 21A or whatever that is. The hardship of that is because they want another house there.
No, that's an existing house, Larry.
No, the house on lot 21 is there, but you're proposing a new house on the next to field 1.
Yeah, and if you would go to the site, and I would love to have the board come out and look at that site. It's not something that's so tiny that you are looking at here. It's enormous. It's an enormous field, and it has an amazing siting for it. And there will be trees that will buffer this, no different than the trees that buffer between Mr. Christman's property and ours now. There's a long stand of Norway spruces.
When this board gave the variance,
his garage is right up against our property. His helistop, as he says, is right up against our property. And if we were to move the driveway, which we could, but you would take agriculture out of play. So you would create a buffer to a neighbor that doesn't farm their property, that does manicure it like a manicured lawn, and maybe a former property owner did manicure this lawn, but that's exactly my point.
Jim,
You know, agriculture. You guys
Jim,
want to talk
gotta
about
stop. Just the question about the 500-foot radius and looking at, or the 500-foot circle, and what was previously approved on lot 15 was because I think you were just a few feet away from that 500-foot circle. It's a little bit different on that lot 21 property. It's not just a
house demolished because there's no 500-foot circle around it. There never was, there never will be. You can't put a 500-foot circle on the lot where the existing house is, but the 500-foot circle does fit on the lot that we're proposing.
And then you're
that does get a 500-foot circle.
You're taking lot 21 and whacking it into two separate lots.
Right, and as Paul mentioned, the road necessarily divides one part of the property from another. So you've created two properties. The new property where the new home would go has a 500-foot circle and has no issue. The only one that does have the issue is the existing home on that lot, and that would never be able to get a 500-foot circle to the existing driveway that exists right now, which is
Well,
really
Jim, you got to take a step back, okay? That 500-foot circle fits on lot 21 now. It fits on lot 21. It doesn't fit on lot 21 once you make lot 21 into two lots.
But
that's the issue. And it doesn't matter that there's an existing home on it. It's a geometry issue.
For you? Like you said, the road bifurcates it, and the existing driveway already exists there. Where we're showing the private road, that's an existing driveway right now. It comes down and it separates that lot into two lots.
No, it doesn't separate it into two lots, Jim. It divides, it goes down the middle of a singular lot.
It divides.
It's a very different situation.
Okay, so we're asking for a lot on one side and a lot on the other side. The newly formed lot, Paul, would have a 500-foot circle on it, correct? That's where the 500-foot circle would exist on the other side of the road, or in our case, the existing on the other side of the driveway. So it does bifurcate that 22-acre lot. But the lot circle is non-compliant and always will be on one side of it, unless you're saying it's only one lot, and then the lot circle is on the other side of the road away from the home. That's what you're suggesting, right?
What the ordinance says is there needs to be a 500-foot circle in a lot. The home does not have to be in that 500-foot circle.
I understand.
In most of your proposed lots, the home is not in the 500-foot circle.
Correct.
Okay, so the point is that existing lot 21 has a 500-foot circle that fits into it. Circle goes over the existing driveway. The existing home may or may not be in that 500-foot circle. That doesn't really matter. What you're creating is a lot that does not have a 500-foot circle on it. The fact that there's an existing dwelling on there is completely irrelevant to the geometry of the property. It's just, it doesn't matter. The fact that it's there means that it's there, but it's irrelevant relative to the 500-foot radius.
I think we understand the point, Mr. Ferrero. So we request a continuance to be able to address all of the issues raised by the board.
Okay, so let's carry to a date certain. Paul, what do you think would make sense here?
Sorry, the meetings in August are the 6th and the 13th. We've got Relocate on the 6th, and I will be away on the 13th, but it doesn't have to be done around me. If we're doing it remotely, I can probably zoom in on that.
Does that work for you, Mr. Levery?
The 6th? Yes.
The 13th.
No,
The 13th.
Yes.
But no Paul?
No, if it's done remotely, I will be there. I will have internet service.
I have the feeling we'll be remote.
I think we will.
I think it will be.
Yeah.
Before we break up, I just wanted to ask, Paul, you have your 13-page, there's a 13 or 9-page report. Are all these issues covered, or are there things in there that, we've yet to discuss?
Well, I think there are things in there that are yet to be discussed. There are a number of comments in there because when the plans were resubmitted, understandably, they didn't resubmit all the sheets. So some of the items weren't addressed. They did not resubmit the stormwater analysis. So all those comments were repeated from the last time. So there's more to do. I think the applicant's objective tonight was to try to get through more of the issues as it relates to the subdivision layout and some of the planning issues rather than more of the technical engineering issues.
Yeah, I was looking particularly on page 4, where there's something about the cul-de-sac on the road that's in the wetlands. Somehow something doesn't work. I didn't quite follow what was going on there.
Well, that was the comments under subparagraph I,
Yes.
site and dimension plan.
Yep.
If you look at the end, I say that no revisions were submitted. So that's just a repeated comment from the last time. So I have not, there's nothing new for me to say there because the plans weren't submitted.
Oh, that has been resolved.
Well, I don't know that it has been resolved because the plans have not been provided.
Ah, gotcha. Okay. So that's something else we have to address yet.
I have a question too. Now we're considering this as a subdivision for 8 lots and they're really looking for 9. So can we really consider this until they resolve the septic situation for the 9th lot?
I think the Board of Health is meeting next week to address that. And I'm fairly confident that it will be approved for that additional lot next week. So I think by the time they're back, we'll be talking about the full 9 lots.
Okay, good. All right. That takes some confusion out of it.
Now, would that going to go back down to 8 if they decide to keep 21 as a single lot, which was one of the boards, I think where we're headed based on what was just discussed?
Well, that's something the applicant's going to have to submit and evaluate and look at and bring back.
Okay. All right.
Let's say, so Mr. Lavery, this is Mr. Collins, would you confirm that you'll extend the time frame for action until the end of August?
Yes, we will.
Thank you, Mr. Lavery. And we will confirm that to everyone, we are carrying this application. Its public hearing will continue without additional notices to August 13th, 2020 at 7 p.m. And it will be a remote meeting. Anything further, Madam Chairman?
No, I don't think so. Not for the applicant. I think we're done.
Okay.
And I guess we can adjourn if we have.
Well, Madam Chairman, I would like to take 1 minute.
Oh, you want? Oh, yes. You want to go over anything?
Yeah, we've got a pending application out there. This is a subdivision for Nicholson property.
Okay.
On Hillside Avenue. I have not issued my completeness letter on it yet. There are some fundamental threshold issues with that. I'm going to be sending something out shortly, but I believe it will require some feedback from both Tom and potentially the township attorney as to whether or not the application can even go forward because of some of the deed restrictions on the lot.
Wait a minute. I lost you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Don't look for me. For some reason, my camera went out about 2 hours ago, which is frankly a good thing because I have spinach in my teeth.
Okay, well, right now I can see nothing, but okay. So you'll send us your comments on that?
Yes, I will. I just wanted to give the board a heads up on where we were with that because I don't think it's ready to be scheduled yet.
Okay, all right, that's fine. I know we got plans. I think Janine sent plans out to everybody.
I don't know if she did
It's
for
empty.
Nicholson because that was only submitted for completeness at this point.
I haven't received anything recently.
Okay.
Yeah, no, just the professionals, Carolyn, you received those.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure who you issued that to. Okay.
Madam Chairman,
yes.
this is Mr. Collins again. I guess
Yes.
we should perhaps talk about when we might have the master plan subcommittee report orally based on the written report that was distributed to the board. I don't have a strong opinion about when that should be, but the board and you may have a preference for when we should have a planning board meeting about it.
Do we need a separate board meeting, or can we put it on one of our meetings? What do you think?
You can do any meeting. Based on tonight's meeting, I wouldn't put it for the 13th.
No, I wouldn't either.
So maybe the 6th, but
I was going to
don't-
say we could put it on at the beginning of the 6th.
I'd rather you do it at the end of a meeting.
Okay.
Let's see. Wait a minute, though. Is the 6th Rilocate?
Yeah, yes.
Relocate's BOA.
BOA. So I'd rather not have those two. Well, it's up to the board. I guess
What'd you say, Mayor? You're away?
No, Rilocate is Board of Adjustment.
Yes.
And the planning board discussion is obviously planning board.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, that's why I suggested we have it first thing and discuss it. I don't know if it's going to be a long discussion for the first meeting on that.
Maybe that is a good night. Rilocate didn't have a lot of problem. Well, it had some problems, but they were going to try to address them. So
Hopefully they will.
hopefully they will address the
Okay.
problems.
Well, why don't we try to do it that way then, if that's okay with everybody? We can. Yes. Okay. All right. So we'll put it on the 6th, and then we'll have Riot after that. Okay. That way the mayor and committee Colin can leave.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So now I guess we can have an adjournment. Do I hear a motion?
So moved, George.
Okay. Okay. Good night, and we'll see you next month.
Good night, everybody.
Night all.
Bye.
Night, everybody.
Good night.